Contract Review Board meeting to order. City Recorder Krieger, please call roll.
Youth Councilor Vogel is excused. Councilor Shaw,
Here.
Councilor Wolf,
Here.
Council President Hu,
Here.
Mayor Noob.
Here. If everyone will stand and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, everyone. We will have an addition tonight under non-agenda items. It is a discussion on the residency requirements for appointed council vacancy applicants, and that is going to be number 11 on the agenda under non-agenda items. City Council or city teammates, anything additional on top of that item this evening?
Nothing from us, Mayor. Thanks.
Okay. We will move on to public comment. If you would like to call in now, please do please do so now to get in the queue. The phone number is 503-966-4101. And there was one comment given at the June 4th council meeting about the Tiedemann Greenberg road design project. Do we have any response to that?
Staff is responding to them.
Okay,
Yes.
Excellent. And then we have our Tigard High School student envoy, and we have Julie Hernandez-Botello here with us today, I believe for her last report of the school year. Come on up. Please just make sure to turn your microphone on.
Hi, Council. I wasn't able to print it out this time, so I'm using this weird device called a computer. So I don't have much this month just because I've been really busy with graduation and my next year plans. But in terms of leadership, last time I told you activities had their night under the stars and it had an amazing turnout. It had all grade levels, and actually Maddie Vogel planned it, so it was great as always. Next year ASB has started well, and we figured out everyone that's going to be in it, including freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. Next year, ASB Chair of Spirit created a new group called Spirit Squad. So they're non-ASB members, and they'll be at all school sporting events to ensure like hype and support within all of the sport events that not all students attend. So they started the applications and they created an official team which ranges in grade level, which is amazing. And June 6th was the senior assembly and the grad walk and senior sunset. And ASB held the senior sunset. It was great. We gave out Otter Pops, and there's like Lake Ridge's school there, and it was insane because they all wanted Otter Pops and we didn't have enough, but it was great to see both of the schools be together. June 7th was our graduation and also our senior breakfast, which ASB helped run. So that was really great. And the last day of school for all grade levels in high school is Friday, so that's great. Spring sports are over. Football has started their fall conditioning and preparation, which is great to see. Arts, I don't have much information. All concerts are finished. But actually, famous Jane Obsey sang at graduation. It was great. If you guys see like the live recording, it was amazing to see, and also like it was just great. She sang a perfect song. And community service, all service clubs have started their summer events, so a lot of the underclassmen are starting to volunteer during summer. But I don't have much information. But thank you so much for allowing me to give updates every month, and it has been a pleasure and a great opportunity to be so close and in contact with you all. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for coming to us every month and letting us know what's going on with the Tigard High School community. How were your first 2 days of freedom? I mean,
I've worked, I've been starting to work more just so I can save up for college. So I've been working 9-hour shifts. I just got off my shift right now, but it's good. it teaches me something before college, so that's good.
Yeah, it's a challenge. So we're happy that you're here. We do have a bit of a surprise for you. We have a resolution in your honor thanking you for your service to the Tigard City Council, and we also have a fun little gift basket for you. But I want to go around and Councilor Wolf, would you like to say something?
Julie, I just wanted to say thanks, and it's just been just so much fun in a variety of my hats to get to work with you. But what are your plans for next year? And I love that you're like, hey, 9-hour shifts, they're great. They prepare me for college, so you're going to be fabulous. But what's your plans?
I'm going, I got this major scholarship, so I'm able to go to Oregon State University, and I'm majoring in bioengineering, so that'll be exciting. But I'm definitely open to different majors because it's a hard major, and you know, my heart is open to anything. So, and anything I do, I think I'll do good. So, but those are my next year plans. So, yeah.
I think that's a great idea, having a general plan, but being open to anything that will serve you well. Anyone else? Yeah, Councilor Shaw.
So, Julie, I just want to say thank you and go Beavs. It's been so wonderful to have you report out. It's been a couple of years since my kiddos have graduated from Tigard High, so it's nice to kind of relive the experience through both your reports but also the event. So just want to say thank you so much, and go Beavs, and we'll be right there to support you.
Council President Hu?
Yeah, thank you so much, Julie, for your presentation the past year, and just want to let you know that I really appreciated when I asked you a question about the Japanese program and you follow up the following month, and that along with your work ethics, I think you will go a long way. So, you know, work hard, because when you do work hard, people will notice that. So congratulations. Thank you.
The resolution basically says that the Tigard City Council wants to connect with students, and we appreciate the monthly updates that you provided and all the coordination you did with activities. And with that, I will entertain a motion to approve resolution number 24-13.
Mayor, I'd make a motion to approve resolution number 24-13.
I second the motion.
Will the city recorder read the number and title of the resolution?
Resolution number 2413. A resolution acknowledging and commending Julie Hernandez Botello for her service as Tigard High School envoy to the Tigard City Council.
All of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The resolution 24-13 is adopted unanimously by the City Council. And next we have the Tigard Area Chamber of Commerce with Chamber Board Chair Tom Engel. Welcome, Tom.
Good evening, everybody. I regret that I cannot be there tonight. I have some people coming to destroy my bathroom tomorrow. So get to do with that. And I also regret that I have no Otter Pops for any of you. Some quick updates I just wanted to highlight. We had our final Leadership Tigard class day for 2024. Thank you very much to the city, the police, the city of Tigard itself, TVFNR, for a really great and informative, fun day. These days in particular, especially with our government folks, really do get high marks, and it's we never want to take it for granted, and we appreciate it. Graduation for this class is going to be June 18th at Broadway Rose Theater. Recruitment for the class of 2025 has kicked off. We're going to be rolling out some new materials for that. And if you know of anybody interested in joining or just wants to learn a little bit more about it, because sometimes when you hear Leadership Tigard or leadership anything, people get this very dreary picture of sitting at a desk all day and being talked at, and that's not always too fun. Have them come and contact any one of us. We'd love to tell them kind of what it's all about and what the experience is like. Government affairs, we've mentioned in the past, we've moved to an online format so it's more accessible. Megan, our illustrious CEO, was the Oregon State Chamber of Commerce rep and represented all the metro area chambers at the State Joint Transportation Committee meeting last week at PCC in North Portland. So we're very grateful she was able to take the time to do that. Our Small Business Community Fund as well. We do have all our information on the website. We do need to emphasize to people who are interested in applying and have applied that we need to make sure all the documentation is in a timely manner for your application to be considered complete. We have 8 applications pending. 3 have been complete with supporting documentation. Megan's been taking some extra efforts to, now that we have a few events wrapped up, she's been taking the efforts to basically go knocking on doors to area businesses to, 1, make them aware, and 2, if they are eligible to apply. And these are, not all of them are chamber members, obviously, but she's gone out of her way to make sure she's getting some face time to make sure that as many people as possible have an opportunity for this. Farmers Market, full swing, Sundays, 9 a.m. to 1:30 at Universal Plaza. We are always grateful for the sponsors, with the Farmers Market, BioLife Plasma, Northwest Natural, Umpqua Bank, SQ Merchant Services, Tualatin Valley Soil and Water Conservation District. These things don't happen on their own. A lot of giving people put in their time and they donate funds for sponsorships so that we can put this on for the community. Multi-chamber networking, Tiger Festival of Balloons, Friday, June 21st at the grounds of the Rogue Ales Beer Garden. That's a fun event. You get a lot of people from different chambers showing up and people who just live over the hill. I still remember when the head of the chamber, who shall remain nameless, said, "This is an amazing park. This is so great. I never knew this was here." And so it's fun to show off Tigard for this event as well. GMT, 7:30 a.m. on Thursdays. Just a quick reminder, we are getting quite a few people showing up and we're getting quite a few new members. Again, it's a great way just to get a snapshot into what nonprofits and businesses are in the community, sometimes what the challenges are, and just to see what is going on in the host business that day as well. Just some quick save the dates. We mentioned Festival of Balloons, the annual board meeting, June 24th, 5:30 to 7. And that's going to be at Broadway Rose. Tigard Chamber State of Business, which we're trying to establish on a more regular basis, September 25th, 9 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. Format pending. Don't quite have any information on that one yet, but looking forward to it. And finally, if you can make sure to follow the Chamber on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. Occasionally, we are finding that, guess what? Not everyone uses social media. So we're having to up our game a little bit and be a little more broad with how we communicate information. If you have any recommendations or suggestions for groups or community members who we should be reaching and maybe aren't, we would be open to hearing that feedback. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions this evening? Nope. Seeing none, thank you so much for being here today, Board Chair Mr. Engel, and we will see you next month.
Thank you very much. You have a good evening.
Next item on our agenda is the interim police chief update with Chief McDonald. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, good evening. Jamie McDonald, the interim chief of police, and I'm here to give you the strategic dashboard for the month of May. And what you see up on the board in front of you tonight is one of the heat maps, or maps that show where we respond for calls for service. And this is for the month of May. And as you can see, they're a little bit bigger for the ones that have more calls in them, and that's by design. That's how these heat maps are developed. And this is something that the mayor and I discussed earlier this year. And a version of this is included each month in the strategic dashboard, so you can see it. One of the things I do want to note is that for the year so far, our dispatch calls for service are almost flat now as compared to last year. We're up slightly, 1% from last year. But the other thing that is encouraging, I mentioned this last month, and it's a result of us seeing more officers out on the street, is that our self-initiated work, so the time that officers get to spend being more proactive is up 18.5% for the year. So that's a really good sign. And what it tells us is that things are starting to maybe level out in terms of the calls for service that the community makes, but it's allowing us more time to have proactive work by having more of those officers out on the street. If we go to the next slide, you'll see what looks like somebody spilled a bottle of ink on the page. And what this is really what is more of a true heat map. And the best thing I can tell you is the one that kind of runs from the bottom center to the upper right. That's Highway 99. And you see a couple of hot spots in different areas. The one in the bottom there, lower right, that's hot is Cook Park. And that's because we get a lot of calls there for things like dogs off leash or other types of things. So this doesn't mean that this is like a hot call, like a 911 crime in progress type of call. This covers pretty much anything. And I like to show something like this to you all because then it really helps to highlight some of those areas where maybe we see more activity. The one that's I guess it's just a little bit below, a little bit down into the right of the center is actually City Hall. And we get a lot of walk-ins here to City Hall, and so that's why that's there. So this is a little instructive to be able to tell you kind of where some of the hot spots are in the city. And I can tell you this, that stays pretty consistent month to month. Couple of neat things to talk about. So Mr. Engel mentioned that we hosted Leadership Tigard today. It was very fun. We were able to give the classmates an orientation to the police department in a snapshot of 45 minutes. Which is like a condensed version of the Community Academy that Council President Hu had the opportunity to go through this spring. And then we did a tour of the facility as well. The neat thing about the folks from Leadership Tigard is they ask really in-depth questions. And that's super fun to get. I mean, we had some really intuitive questions today, which was really interesting to be able to interact with the members of that class. And then finally, I'll close with some exciting news. We had a sergeant retire in December of last year after being with the police department for 27 years. And we were able to get some staffing back to where we could actually do a promotion to fill that spot. And we promoted Sergeant Gregston from the traffic safety unit, so he was one of our motorcycle officers. So last Tuesday we promoted him to sergeant. He started with the department in 2016, and he spent actually 12 years in the Oregon Army National Guard and left there as a captain. And so this is a really good opportunity for us to bring in some new leadership and start to cultivate the next generation of leaders in the police department. So I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Councilor Shaw?
Thank you, and excited about the promotions, and appreciate the heat maps as well. That's really key to see, and I have a couple of questions offline to ask you. But regarding the crime snapshot, the report that you also included in our council packets online, it looks like assault and robbery is still in the red, as well as the burglary of businesses and response time for priority 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. So it's just given the report that there's not many calls coming in, but those seem to still be red. Is this just because it was May and it's changing now that we're in June, or what is accounting for that?
Yeah, the one thing that I can say is that when you start looking at things like assaults and robberies, those are very time intensive. As we've talked about in the past, our crisis calls, so the mental health folks that are in mental health crisis, those are often very time intensive, officer intensive. So because we really take our time to be deliberate on those types of calls. That has a direct impact on our ability to respond to those high priority calls, because often we have to break an officer free from one of those other calls in order to respond to that. And while it is up slightly over last year, it is overall we're starting to see where we're maybe being able to make an impact by having that better staffing. So yeah, some of the more critical calls, like the person crimes are still trending up 18% over last year at this point. So overall, the calls for service are flattening out, but the actual reported crimes continue to trend more than last year. And not all the way across the board, but pretty consistently. Yeah.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you, Chief McDonald.
Thank you.
Next item on our agenda is written public comment. We did have receive one comment yesterday by noon from Shannon Audino, advocating on behalf of the Tigard Music Festival. City Recorder Krager, has anyone signed up to comment in person this evening?
No one has signed up.
Thank you. Mr. Vang, are there any phone callers in the queue or anyone wishing to comment by video this evening?
No callers, Mayor.
All right, thank you so much. And we will next go to City Manager Reimer for the City Manager report.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, good evening, Mayor, councilors, members of the community, and my teammates. I'll be brief since you have a significant agenda in front of you for this evening with many different topics. I want to start by saying thanks and kudos to Tina Escalera. So Tina just graduated from the Northwest Women's Leadership Academy. So kudos to her. That was the cohort had their graduation last Friday. Tina did a great job. Tina now joins Nicole, Sammy, and Sambo as our teammates that have gone through the academy. I also want to say thanks to Nicole and Sambo for giving some of their time to help guide that group and the Leadership Academy overall. So thank you, Sambo. Second is we talked about our summer reading program. We're kicking it off. First week, we already had over 700 teens, youth, and adults sign up. So community members can continue to sign up and complete the challenge by August 31st, and everyone gets a free book, as we mentioned, for that. And then my last thing is tomorrow night, which is June 12th, 7 o'clock, at the Heritage Trail right next to Symposium and the Chamber. We are having our community walks, our local history walk in downtown Tigard, where members can learn more about the entrepreneurs, businesses, events that help shape downtown. So always a fun event, I know, for our community to join others just to learn a little bit more about us. So just a reminder, that starts at 7 o'clock right at the Tigard Heritage Trail. And that concludes my remarks, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we will move on to our community organization update with the Family Justice Center with Executive Director Rachel Schutz. Thank you. Excellent. Please come on up and then just turn the microphone on.
Wonderful.
Yep, and you'll just need to say next slide to advance the slide.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Rachel Schutz. I'm the Executive Director of the Family Justice Center. And you guys reached out to us this year and asked if we could do a general overview presentation of the Family Justice Center, which I think is wonderful. So that's what I'm going to be giving you guys today. And then a brief update on numbers. In your packets, you do have our 2023 annual report with data about the City of Tigard inside of it. Next slide, please. So the Family Justice Center is a unique model, and it was actually our community here in Washington County that came together in 2014 to start designing that. The reason that we wanted to have a different kind of response for domestic violence in particular in Washington County was because, one, we wanted to be able to provide better resources to folks that were here in our own community, and two, the reality is Oregon has higher than the national average rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and childhood trauma. And so we wanted to make sure that with all of the barriers that there are to getting services and supports necessary when you are experiencing abuse, the thing that we all could do as a community is work together to reduce those barriers as much as possible. And one of those big barriers that we can absolutely work together to reduce is the need for access physically or geographically. So we have currently 18 agencies that operate out of the inside of the Family Justice Center, and that would have meant you would have had to go to 18 different locations around Washington County, and you all know Washington County is a very large county. And so then when you factor in things like transportation or bringing children along or any other numerous lacks of access or barriers that you might face outside of the abuse that might be happening, we wanted to try to make something better for those in our community. Next slide, please. So what's really different about the Family Justice Center and what we do on a daily basis is collaboration. And so a lot of folks will start by describing a Family Justice Center as sort of like a mall where there is a lot of different stores inside of one giant building. And it's true, we do a lot of things inside of a building, but what I like to talk about is it's not just that, because people don't walk in and then suddenly it's on them to try to find out where the other agencies are and try to wander around the building, and sort of a one-stop location of having all these barriers and sort of wandering around trying to figure things out. What happens is folks come in and they have a single access point. So we have a single form that has all of the services that all of our agencies provide, and they get to fill that out and then asking for the things that they need, and then the staff of the Family Justice Center does the work to coordinate and collaborate with all of those agencies so that survivors don't have to go through that process themselves. They don't have to go through multiple different intakes. They don't have to try to find the provider by themselves. They don't have to try to figure out all these things alone any longer. We are able to be there to walk beside them, to do that work together. And then we also do the work of collaborating with the partners together. So even when you put folks in a building together, there are still lots of different processes and protocols and requirements and all that type of stuff. So we work together to figure out what is the continuum of services in any one area? What's the continuum of services between providers for housing or for food access or for safety or for whatever that might be, so that we can figure out if somebody needs something, what's their single access point, and then how do we move them smoothly between all of the service providers that they might need to see that day. Also, the collaborative model of the Family Justice Center has been well researched, and it's actually the national best practice for permanently breaking the cycles of family violence through generations, which we're really proud of. Next slide, please. So the final piece of why we would do all of this work, why would we bring all of these services together? Why did we go through this 4-year planning process? Why do we have a whole agency that is dedicated to coordination and collaboration between a bunch of other agencies? It's because our bigger goal is impacting outcomes in our community. So we know that Oregon has higher than the national average rates of violence and abuse. We want to ensure that the impacts of that, which is short and long-term trauma, which you can see has both short and long-term serious impacts, doesn't continue over and over and over in generationally to impact then not just the individuals that have experienced that, but our school systems and our economic systems and our healthcare systems and our law enforcement systems expanding out into our community. Because even though these things might seem extremely individual and extremely isolated, the reality is that they're not. They ripple far and wide into our community. And so by bringing all these folks together to provide collective action on this issue, we're able to provide a healthier and more safe community as a whole in Washington County. Next slide, please. So what that looks like is these are all of the agencies that we have located inside of our center currently. So we have our big agencies such as the Domestic Violence Resource Center and the Sexual Assault Resource Center and Safety Compass that works with survivors of sex trafficking. We also have providers for mental health as well as legal services. We have our law enforcement agencies, and actually Tigard Police Department just joined us. I think only 3 weeks ago now, which has been extremely wonderful. We have home visiting programs, we have community action for basic needs support, Department of Human Services, et cetera, making sure that whatever those needs are that are emerging, we're able to provide those. And then our model is when we uncover a need that is emerging in the community, we don't try to create a program that is duplicative of something that another agency is doing. We find that agency and see if they're willing to come and join us. So one of our newer partners is Adelante Mujeres, so that they can provide that culturally specific Beyond Trauma program that is so outstanding, instead of us trying to create a culturally specific support program, or St. Andrew's Legal Clinic for that 1 hour of free legal advice as opposed to long-term legal representations. We were able to bring them in, which I think is great because that also maximizes efficiency and reduces redundancy across all of our different agencies. Next slide, please. So these are all of the different services that are provided at the Family Justice Center by the different partners, things like advocacy and safety planning, restraining orders. We do have a court on site, emergency shelter, legal assistance, basic needs supplies, case reporting and follow-up, and housing utility assistance, benefits, safe phones, counseling support groups, parent and child supports, and then also drop-in childcare, among other things. Next slide, please. And these are different spaces inside of the Family Justice Center. So what we have on site in our physical building is we have childcare on site. So if anybody brings their children, we're able to provide childcare for them so the children have a safe place to be. We have a food pantry and clothing closet. We have showers. We have our secure reception and living room and kitchen. And then we have a courtroom. We have trauma-informed interviewing and counseling rooms, and then also support group and education spaces. And then those are some of those pictures that I just described. Next slide, please. And then these are some of the quotes from that we get back on our feedback survey forms. And I just like to put those up, and I've been here long enough now that I recognize all of those, so it's really, it's a reminder for me, really. So just my favorite one of all time is that says, "Thank you for giving me the incredible strength that I am not a victim, but I am a survivor." And that I think about that and I say that out loud a lot in the course of our work. Next slide, please. So this is what our numbers over the years have looked like. So total clients is on the top and total services on the bottom. So in 2021, we served 1,900 folks. And then in 2023, we served 5,600 folks. In 2021, we provided 2,600 services. And this past year, we provided 10,041 services. So we've grown pretty rapidly in the services that we are providing throughout the last 3 years. Next slide. And then you guys have heard us talking a little bit about this from time to time, but we are in the development process for our new center, which will be the Family Peace Center. And that encompasses additional partners, and it encompasses really a broad array of services in the categories of prevention, intervention, healing, and hope, to make sure that there are those intervention programs, also the prevention, which is extremely important, but then also the healing and hope. And hope in our line of work means resilience in a lot of other lines of work. So how do we make sure that there's that generational hope that keeps a family stable and healthy and safe and healed throughout time? And so this is what we are working on. We have, and we hope that our new center will be open in April of 2026. Next slide. So I always like to end with this and say this, that together we can end the cycles of violence and abuse, because truly it does take all of us together. The Family Justice Center doesn't live inside of everybody's homes. It's really everybody in this message, in this conversation around violence and abuse, sort of permeating throughout the community, creating safe spaces throughout our community, offering the healing services that are necessary when harm happens, and then building up that hope and resilience into our children, into our folks and our families now, and then also into future generations, which are the things that prevent violence in the long term. And last slide. So this is our contact information. So our walk-in hours are 8:30 to 4. Nobody needs an appointment in order to come in. Our doors are just open during that time. And then we do have other services that are before that or after that, and those are appointment-based, like counseling. Counseling, for instance, runs till 9 p.m., kind of a thing. We have law enforcement officers that are there later, or some services run overnight. Our address is in Beaverton, and then we have our TriMet bus stop, and then our Max stop listed, and then we now have a partnership with Ride Connection for scheduled transportation to the Family Justice Center. So if people need scheduled rides, that's a great option. And then also our phone number, which is available 24/7, and after hours it will connect to all the partner crisis lines. So domestic violence, sexual assault, law enforcement, mental health, et cetera, et cetera. And then our website, of course, which has all kinds of additional information. And then for those on screen, I mentioned how many folks we served in total, but in Tigard we served 309 folks that identified as residing in Tigard, with 554 services in 2023. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Thank you. I will, yeah, Councilor Wolf. Councilor Wolf, go ahead.
Thank you, Rachel. I was kind of looking through the report again, and I appreciate just the huge challenges that COVID has brought and still remain with us, but yet the comments about momentum building in 23. So just given your experience, have you seen hopefully things leveling out, but shifts that in just the, I'm not even sure the words I'm trying to use, of the impact that concern you, or kind of root causes, or are we headed in a good direction, or what the need is in domestic violence?
Yeah, those are truly excellent questions, and the concern remains for a couple reasons. So one, we saw a big increase during the COVID pandemics, and we saw that in the realm of not just domestic violence, but also sexual assault and child abuse. You guys probably heard a lot about child abuse simply because we knew that it went up, but the reports went way down. And the other concerning thing that we are finding is homicide rates. So homicide rates have continued to go up, and that's not just been in Washington County, it's not just been in Oregon, it's actually been across the country, specifically homicide rates in general, and then homicide, domestic violence, homicide. And that's I believe it is still the leading cause of homicide in Washington County is domestic violence related. And so there's several factors that play into that, but also a competing factor is during that time we all greatly increased our outreach. And so when we knew that things were going to, that this was a trend that we were seeing, that the rates were increasing, that stress was vastly increasing inside of homes around us in our communities, we started really stepping up those outreach efforts. And so now what I think we're seeing is the realization of people coming to get the services that they already needed. What I don't think we're seeing is a huge increase, because when I see 5,600 clients that we served, I mean, that is a lot, and it's staggering, particularly looking at the 3-year trajectory, but it's not 40% of Washington County's population. So I know that we are also not yet reaching all the people that we could be serving. And so there will be a critical mass that we reach if everything stays the same, but I just think that things are not always going to remain the same, and things will change. Things that we see in our community that tend to exacerbate what's happening is always stress-based. So stress doesn't cause violence, but it exacerbates violence. And so when we see large employers in the community doing big layoffs, we see a spike in calls for service. When we have holiday times, we see a spike. When we have, and then research says during natural disasters or big climate change events or things like that, we see big spikes in violence and abuse. And so what I mean by if everything stays the same, we'll reach a critical mass and then things will go down. I think things will change, so I think we're gonna go ahead and go like this, but my hope is that we go down. So that was a very long answer.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome.
Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your presentation. Yeah, when I look at that page of logos of law enforcement partners, I didn't see the city of Tigard, and I was going to ask you potentially an awkward question, but good thing they they're starting to be there a couple weeks ago, so that's great. So in terms of law enforcement, all under one roof, how does that work?
a great question.
Do they come regularly, or do they come to your mall? If people make an appointment, how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So those folks have offices. So our Tigard officer now has an office.
Oh, okay.
And so that is where they are stationed. Different departments do it a little bit differently, but that is their station, and what they do, what those officers do, typically they are experienced in detective work or they are detectives. And what they will do is when somebody comes in and they want to speak with law enforcement, we will find out if there's an officer from their town that's there. Even if they're not, that's okay, because that's one of the great things about having multiple different departments is our officers will take a report from anyone from anywhere. We have people that come from out of state, and they'll take the report and they will report it to the department. We had an example that I think of a lot from Montana, and our detective found the department in Montana and then actually knew somebody in that department, and they were able to identify the person that they were looking for, and she was able to be on the phone when they went and arrested the person that needed to be arrested. So like that's the level of follow-up that they're willing to do, which is really cool, even if it's like way outside of the jurisdiction. It was really important to have Tigard in particular because Tigard is one of our higher service populations. And so in terms of the metro area, it's Beaverton, Hillsborough, and then it's Tigard. And I think that there's really good access to the center from Tigard, but also the Tigard Police Department has always been very involved. And they have been one of the ones that does the most transportation of individuals from the city to the center. And the chiefs have always been really involved with me. And so that has made a huge difference in making sure that the residents of Tigard are getting the information about the Family Justice Center. So that's kind of how that works.
Okay, and one more question.
Yeah.
So in your annual report, out of the 10,000 service, a little bit over 10,000 services provided and 5,600 clients served, you list shelters 168 and hotels 62.
Yes.
So compared to 10,000 services, those numbers seems very low. So I'm just wondering, is it because of limited supply or just because the demand is not that high for shelters?
It's a great question. It's because of supply. It's how many people can be sheltered. So the Domestic Violence Resource Center is the organization that runs domestic violence specific shelters in Washington County. They have one immediate crisis shelter, which is 90 days, and then they have one family shelter, which is up to 2 years, and then they have one scattered site program that has 20 apartment units. And so that's the entire stock of domestic violence shelter we have in Washington County. That's extremely low, and they know it too. And so the amount of folks that we can take into longer term shelter is it's very low. I mean, you can do the math.
Yeah.
And then hoteling is usually we will do hotels for immediate danger or when there is a protective action being taken on the offender put into place. And we'll usually try to look for other agencies or other shelters or things like that and to lodge them in longer term, because if you put somebody in a hotel for even up to 2 weeks and then they have nowhere else to go, that's not fair. And so a lot of the sheltering ends up happening and doesn't get captured in these numbers because it has to happen elsewhere because the stock is so low, unfortunately. We were actually just over at Family Promise working with them and tightening that up. And so housing and shelter is the biggest need that we see. And that is the biggest demand that we see, and it's because the options are so limited. These numbers also don't necessarily capture the entirety of DVRC's housing program. They certainly serve many more folks than come directly through here. And so These are a little bit artificially low, but at the same time, we know that the stock is already extremely low.
Yeah, and it's not counting people, for example, leaving their cars and stuff
That's
like that, right?
absolutely
All right.
correct.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Shaw?
Thank you very much for the presentation. And Councilor Wolf had asked one of my questions, and you explained the jump in the numbers between 21 and 22, so thank you. Do you track the individuals or the services, the individuals you serve from Tiger, do you track if they're houseless?
We would if they volunteered that information.
Okay.
And so I could find that information, and it would just take me a little bit of data figuring, but yeah, absolutely.
I'm just curious because
Yeah.
through Strategic Initiatives Manager, Zell, we have a committee called CHART. It's a gathering where nonprofits get together to really talk about what resources they have, leverage resources, fill in the gaps. And I'm sure I'm missing a few other strategic initiatives, but curious if Family Centered Justice is part of that, or if not, maybe something you'd consider becoming a
Absolutely.
part of.
That would be great. We would love that. What we know statistically in just the Portland metro area is that the majority, it's 56% of women or women with children, their primary cause of homelessness is escaping domestic violence. So we would bet that a majority. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you for being here today to talk about this really important topic. I think it's something that we're all aware of is in our community, but it's something that's not really comfortable to talk about. It's an incredible service that's provided, especially the one stop and taking down those barriers. And I really look forward to the day that we don't need you.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys are more than welcome at any time if you want to reach out to have a tour of the space. We do those in the evenings if ever you're interested. And then also if you guys have any avenues in which you share information, we'd be more than happy to share with you all of our materials. Some cities put it in their water bills, for instance, because it's just a ubiquitous thing that goes into all homes instead of people having to seek it out, or they put it on their websites, or some chambers have welcome packets, for instance, and they'll put it in those if they're new residents. So if you guys have any specific places, or the libraries or the schools, I'm happy to send that or bring all that information out. We have a new peer outreach program, and 2 of those peers live here in Tigard, and so they're very excited to access spaces in Tigard to share information.
That's a really great idea, and knowing our Tigard Library and our Chamber of Commerce and all, everybody, I'm sure, would be very open to that idea.
Wonderful.
So we will, I'm looking at the city manager, and he's nodding,
He's like,
that we will get you connected to the right people.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your
so
time
much.
today. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, which is used for routine items including minutes and approval of contracts or intergovernmental agreements. Information on each item is available on the city's website in the packet for this meeting. Items may be enacted in one motion without separate discussion, and council members may request that an item be removed by motion for discussion and separate action. On the consent agenda tonight is on-call signal and streetlight maintenance and replacement contract, a pavement management program preventative maintenance chip seal, and a pavement management program preventative maintenance slurry seal. Are there any questions or comments or a motion this evening?
Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all of those in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The consent agenda is adopted by unanimous vote of the council. The next item on our agenda this evening is a briefing on River Terrace 2.0 Community Plan Kickoff. And we have Senior Planner Skylar Warner here to present today. I hope you're feeling better.
I am. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Lube and members of the City Council. I am happy to be with you. I am recovered. My name is Skylar Warren. I'm a senior planner in the Department of Community Development, and I'm here tonight to provide you with an update on the kickoff of our community planning process for River Terrace 2.0. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start with a little bit of background on where we've been before I talk about where we're headed. So the first River Terrace expansion area, which was previously part of the West Bull Mountain concept plan, is shown here outlined in green. The city completed and adopted the community plan for this area in 2014, followed by the development code in 2015. So the first land use applications that were submitted to the city came in later that year. So let me throw out some fast facts on this area. We estimated at the time that we completed the plan that this would produce roughly 2,587 dwelling units, or somewhere around 6,500 new residents. 9 short years later, the area is 85% entitled, with 14 developments for a total of 2,431 entitled units to date, and still more to come. So we've already gotten to just shy of 100 below what we projected. Our estimated park need was 9.62 acres of neighborhood parks and 19.25 acres of community parks. We've also exceeded those marks already. Given that this area was intended to develop over 20 years, I think we consider this a phenomenal success. Next slide.
I was going to say it doesn't look anything like that anymore.
It does not, and you can see here, this image is from 2022, but you can see at least some of the process of the street layout in this area. So in 2019, the council directed staff to pursue the addition of the city's last 2 remaining urban reserves, collectively known as River Terrace 2.0, and they are shown here on the map outlined in yellow. So the community development team went to work finding resources to support this planning effort, and in 2020, with support from grants from Metro and the Department of Land Conservation and Development, we kicked off the concept planning process for River Terrace. Over the following year, we worked with stakeholders to develop a plan that addressed the needs of our community while meeting state and regional requirements. Next slide. So at the outset of this project, the team, project team, based on council goals and the city's strategic plan, identified equity and climate as 2 lenses that would guide the vision of the project. Next slide. These lenses then helped our stakeholders shape a vision for the community. That vision is for a neighborhood that provides for a full matrix of housing types intermixed throughout at a density of 20 dwelling units per acre, with policy options to incentivize and support affordable housing, with walkable options for work and destinations, a neighborhood that's genuinely multimodal with transit supportive development patterns, parks that are focused on community gathering places that are distributed equitably, protecting the ecological function of our natural areas and preserving habitat connectivity, and making sure that we deploy infrastructure in a cost-efficient and sustainable manner, serving our housing goals. Next slide. So this vision resulted in a concept plan for the area that is built around 3 neighborhood-scale Main Street areas. This is reflected here in the map by the purple areas, and I won't spend a lot of time on this because I know you've seen this before. Next slide. The housing approach in the neighborhood is centered on the council's original direction to meet that density target of 20 dwelling units per acre, and is intended to implement a mixed income neighborhood that offers equitable housing opportunities for first-time homebuyers, seniors, and lower income families with a focus on middle housing deployment. Based on this concept plan and housing approach, the Metro Council approved the city's application for an expansion of the urban growth boundary in February of 2023. Next slide. So once that urban growth boundary expansion was acknowledged, we set to work building the financial supports that we would need to complete the next phase of this planning. Metro provided us with an award of $700,000, later increased to $800,000. We received $117,000 from the Department of Land Conservation and Development to support our housing plan and infrastructure plans. And I just received notice late last week that our 3rd request for support of our development code work was funded fully in the amount of $80,000 from the same agency. And then lastly, we have a formula grant from the Department of Energy under the Inflation Reduction Act that will provide $118,000 for climate and energy efficiency planning. So all told, we have just over $1 million in grant funding to support a project with a consultant budget of around $1.43 million. The remaining amount is funded through the community development budget, and that is spread over 3 fiscal years. Next slide. So a quick look at our timeline to date. In October, shortly after we received that Metro and DLCD award, we issued an RFP for planning and community engagement services. And in December, we selected 2 contractors to proceed to contract negotiations, and that process was complete in March. So we quickly turned around and kicked off the project just a couple weeks later on April 11th with the core project management team. And then a week later, we held a meeting with the full project team, so that included all the subcontractors. And then the following week, we did a site tour with select members of the project team. Next slide. So moving forward, this planning process is going to take us about 2 years to complete. So the earliest we would expect to see development applications would be in the summer of 2026. Next slide. So recognizing for those folks that have been waiting since 2019 to see development happen, and that includes the property owners out in that area right now, we want to streamline the process as much as possible. So to that end, we're proposing to run an annexation process concurrent with the development process, or with the planning process, phasing in our city taxes and keeping the lands in county zoning until our own zoning and regulations are complete with the community plan. So this helps property owners by providing a degree of certainty on the future of their properties, while also reducing costs for all the parties involved by utilizing a single process and using existing legal descriptions of the area. This also streamlines the process for council by making one decision instead of several, and it reduces the amount of time to prepare these lands for development. Next slide. So an annexation like this that involves multiple properties will use what's called the triple majority process under state law. So this is a process where we go out and receive consent from at least half of the property owners, collectively representing at least half of the land area within the annexed area, and half of the assessed value on the assessor's rolls. Next slide. So as an incentive to participate in this annexation process, we are proposing a property tax phase-in as allowed under state law. So we have some precedent for this, and the same process we used back in 2011 when we annexed the original River Terrace areas. In that effort, we offered a phase-in rate of 33% the first year, 66% the second year, and then full value in the third year. So the challenge here is making sure that the rate schedule that we propose in the phase-in is enticing, while still maintaining our ability to maintain city services. So the proposed rate structure that we're bringing forward this time is 0% in the first year, followed by 50% in the second year, and 100% in the third year. That accounts for, we acknowledge that in the first year, mainly we are doing planning work that's already accounted for, and that these are rural properties, large properties. There's only about 40 of them, and their demand on city services is relatively minimal compared to other urbanized properties. So this approach has received concurrence from the leadership of our community development, public works, finance, and police departments. So we hope to begin the annexation process later this summer. We'll be doing some outreach to the property owners. They do know that we have been considering this. We've done some previous communications with them. We will continue to do that, and we'll continue to provide updates to council as that work progresses. So next slide, that ends my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions the council might have at this time.
Thank you, Skylar. Are you looking today for guidance on if the rate structure and the annexation concurrence is an improved direction from the council?
Yes, I think we'd like to get a sense from council if that is a palatable rate structure. No formal action is requested, but concurrence from the council would help us to proceed with that.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Councilor Shaw, do you have any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. The precedent that had been set before, do you know how many approximately that would have affected? You said it was about 40 for the current rate structure you're proposing. Do you have a number for that?
I don't know the number of properties, and I don't know the assessed value of those properties, but I can get that information for you.
Okay, and then we often hear just about how maintenance of our parks is very key, and we know there's quite a few parks that are becoming online, and we know that there's a current, perhaps not shortfall, but maintenance is an issue. So do you feel the 0, 50, 100, even though it's 40 properties, that assumes zero money going to, obviously, the public works and parks? Is that going to be an issue?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think our assumption at this stage is that these properties, by virtue of their proximity to the city, are already using those city parks. They're already using city services in some sense, and their impact wouldn't necessarily change in this intermediate time. Where the impact really increases is at the time of development, when they become a lot more dense. A lot of these properties don't actually have occupants. Okay, I shouldn't say a lot. A few of these properties don't have occupants currently. They're owned by families who live elsewhere. They maintain it as a farm, but they don't necessarily live on the property.
Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Skylar. Yeah, in terms of the guidance question, I would just need a little bit more information because, yeah, those are great assumptions, but I don't know why I don't know, and who knows? Maybe all of a sudden they need a lot of police services, right? So I don't know. But anyway, I just need more information, I guess. I think my question is, from the council newsletter last week, I saw in River Terrace 1.0, there will be 20 new homes coming online, and all of them at least 3,000 square feet, and starting price is like $1 million. So, I mean, great for people who can afford it, but it just doesn't seem very affordable to me for average, people. So I'm just wondering, the vision you mentioned, equity lens and those things for River Terrace 2.0, those are not there originally for River Terrace 1.0, right? So I'm just I'm trying to ask is what's the difference between the vision for River Terrace 1.0 versus 2.0, and how is 2.0 going to help us, address the, housing crisis more, I guess. So if you could answer that.
This is a great question. Thank you for asking it. With River Terrace 1, we did a lot of really visionary things. We did a lot of cutting edge work. I think our work on stormwater, for example, has become a model for the region and for clean water services. In terms of the housing provision, it was still a very conventional deployment of housing, a conventional density structure. We weren't necessarily focused on affordable housing as much, and we certainly weren't focused on middle housing. With this new area, those are sort of the prime focus areas for us in terms of why we're doing this in the first place. When we say equity, it's equity in our planning work, but more than that, it's equity in the way that we construct the built environment so that it's accessible to everyone, that everyone can participate in urban life in the city of Tigard. And in order to do that, we're going to have to be very methodical and intentional about the way that we create our development code and the regulations that govern this area, to make sure that we are creating a neighborhood that has accessible housing, smaller housing, lower cost housing. Some of that could be regulated affordable housing. That's certainly something that we're looking closely at, but a lot of it will be market rate, hopefully lower cost housing, and we'll have to look at some policy options for how we get there, and that's TBD, I guess, to be determined by the planning process.
Yeah, because I'm kind of conflicted between market, economy, free economy versus, do we really want to continue building this minimum $1 million homes? I'm internally conflicted, so further guidance and public input would be helpful. I guess that's why we're doing this public outreach, to see what the community wants. So.
And the Community Advisory Committee on the concept plan shared your outlook and your vision, and their concern was that we take seriously our promise to deliver a neighborhood that's accessible to everyone.
Right. Thank you.
If I could just talk about this for a little bit, I guess just because I literally live across the street from what you're talking about, and being deeply and living in a neighborhood that has multiple different kinds of housing. So I was intrigued too when I saw that, and I looked, and it is a very small section of the area, which is also surrounded. So it's off of Bull Mountain Road when you turn south and sort of go into the Art Ruckin area, and it's closer to the Art Ruckin school. But you also have to go by multifamily housing and small housing and all of these things to get to this small area with these larger homes. And I also believe that it's important for us to look at all types of housing, so we can have individuals who are economically mobile that can get out of their starter homes into the larger homes, to then turn over these starter homes for individuals to have the lower price points. I will also say, I think it's really important, and what I love about living in River Terrace is there is a wide variety of people in economic situations who live next door to each other, whose kids all play together. And we know in these brand new neighborhoods, it is all mostly, except for like the 1-stories that were built in River Terrace, families with small children. And I love that in the playground, there are individuals from different economic backgrounds and house sizes playing together, which is the kind of community that we're trying to build. And so I want to stretch your mind a little bit to say that it's not an entire huge area of these large homes. It's a small section, and there is also a wide variety of different housing around that section. So I don't want your opinion to be clouded and say we're just building, I think one of the homes was like 4,000 square feet. It was huge. Those kinds of homes all over. It was a small section. And so if you'd like a tour, come on out. I will drive you around and show you. But I also agree that I think it's important that we continue to focus on having affordable homes. But I will tell you, it's pretty cool and magical to see the way that the community is coming together between, across from me, I live across from a multifamily home with a child who just turned 1, and her and my daughter. I mean, it's cool stuff happening in the neighborhood. So I just want to also preface it with that. I understand where you're coming from. The reality on the ground feels a little different.
I totally understand, and I toured those places multiple times as planning commissioner, so I know what you're talking about. I'm just expressing my concerns that right now I heard that we're not short of luxury homes, right? We're short of affordable housing, so I just want to bring that, up and front. But I also understand the benefit of having, mixture of multi, economic background and things like that. But yeah, thank you. Yeah. I understand.
Councilor Wolf?
No, it's an interesting conversation, and I guess for someone that lives in a neighborhood that's just over 25 years old that's probably 3 to 4 homes per acre. So Skylar, when you say 20 homes per acre, I mean, to me that brings down probably what that starting entry point is going to be. So that's kind of what I was thinking in terms of maybe an opportunity. And I was also reflecting on, you don't know what you don't know. Clearly I'm learning a lot about where we are in the annexation process. And I guess my only questions is I'm now, as it's kind of all sinking in, just really intrigued on how you develop, how you negotiate all at the same time. And clearly the experts in the city's departments have all said green light, this makes sense. But I'm also just curious about the risks, pros and cons that you all weighed on how you do that. My sense was that with the initial annexation, because again, I think I mentioned with my school board hat on and how all that development came in, was much more of a smooth process than existing areas that were once, several years ago when they were considered for annexation. So I'm still learning, I guess, and just trying to understand how you kind of got to some of that. And we don't have to go into that detail tonight, but clearly that's how the system works, so I just have more to learn. So thank you.
Council President, you were saying that you want more information. Can you, I think, be specific as far as what kind of information you're looking for, so we can give the city team some guidance?
Well, the proposed rate is different from the original River Terrace 1 rate, so I'm just wondering why is it different? What did you realize you made the wrong assumption when you set those rates in River Terrace 1, or is the River Terrace 1 so different than River Terrace 2 we can afford to drop from 33% to 0%? I don't know. This is the first time I heard that information, so I'm hesitant to giving guidance when I don't know anything. So maybe more information on the underlying assumption. Why is it different than River Terrace?
And I would have the same question. Council President Hu.
And we will come back with another item that's focused on the annexation process and further discussion about the rate structure. I can tell you that, again, in the Infrastructure and Investment Committee where we discussed the rate structure, we had a pretty robust conversation about right-sizing this and making sure that annexation, that there wasn't a disincentive to annexing to the city, because it is to our benefit. It's more cost effective for us, it's more cost effective for them. And the consensus among the group, Finance, Public Works, that there was minimal or maybe even no impact really to city services from these properties that are essentially in rural use right now. And in speaking with the interim chief, he also was not concerned about additional, calls for service from police for these 40 properties, given their use and given the sort of history, I guess, of calls to that area. As you can probably imagine, most of the calls for service, I think, countywide or even in Tigard, are going to be automobile accidents that are on the larger arterial facilities that are in the area. But of course, the dashboard would, give more information about that than I ever could. So I think that was the consensus of the group, is just that in balancing these things against one another, and a 0% rate in the first year, acknowledging that most of the work that the city was going to be undertaking for the area was planning, seemed to make sense. But we can provide more background on that when we come back.
Yeah, Council President.
And I assume that this landowner is going to make lots of money selling their land to developer in the future. So I would think that would be good incentive, right? And the process you mentioned, it's written consent. That's if we want them to voluntarily be annexed in there. But if I remember correctly, there are other ways to annex those property without consent. Of course, we don't want that happen if we can avoid it, right? Is that?
The only way that we can annex properties without consent is through island annexations or through individual property owners coming in one by one, or maybe as a small group to annex themselves, and then they have to be contiguous. So it becomes more difficult if you have a property owner that's in one corner who wants to develop, but the properties that are intervening between theirs are not willing to annex. Then you get in a situation where that property owner can't develop. Whereas if they were developed as a whole, all the properties are in, and they can figure out right-of-way access and infrastructure access individually without having to worry about whether the intervening property owners are going to annex.
Yeah, I'm sorry for getting into the weed at this
Yeah.
point. We're far away
Yeah.
from there right now. But I'm just wanted to express my early reservation. It's not
Sure.
I'm not against it, but of course I need more data. So that's all I'm saying. So thank you.
I also want to acknowledge that these are rural properties, and I've met with a lot of the property owners and the families whose farms these are. And I just also want to put that acknowledgement out there that this is not land that they are just looking to flip and make a ton of money on, and just the delicacy around the change that is happening in their area of what used to be all farmland as the urban sprawl creeps into their family history. So I want to center that too in this conversation to ensure that we're not just talking dollars and cents. We're realizing that this has is land to families that has a lot of sentimental value in a lot of cases, and that is challenging for them to see the change coming. So I hear that I don't think that there is any concern over having these processes run at the same time. I think there are some questions and looking for some additional guidance around the annexation percentages. I'll just tell you, for me, it makes total and complete sense, the 0, 50, and 100, just because knowing these properties, again, probably because I'm out there and I know exactly what I'm looking at, and knowing that it's probably also more incentivizing to have 0% in the first year, acknowledging that it's not going to be an additional drain on city services. So I will just tell you that I'm in support of that. I don't need additional information, but I understand that the rest of council does. Are there any additional questions? Yeah, Councilor Shaw?
Thank you. And Senior Planner Warren, I really appreciate the presentation and the information. When would the proposed rate structure for the annexation and crystal ball, when would that potentially, if approved, whatever percentage ends up being, when would that start?
So it would ideally be based on tax years. And so presuming that we come back to council by the end of this year, early next year, first quarter of next year, with an annexation proposal where we've got the triple majority, we would be looking at 0% in that first year. So basically, as we wrap up the community planning process, and then the second year it's 50%. And I should note that it's 50%. The idea is that it's 50% only as long as the property does not urbanize. Once it goes through any kind of development process, they would no longer be eligible for the 50% rate.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions or discussion? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will move on to the commercial vacancy discussion, and we have redevelopment manager, project manager Fairley and community development project manager Houther to give the report. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor, councilors, city team, and community members. We're here tonight to talk about some options concerning commercial vacant buildings, primarily in our TIF districts. Next slide. We'll talk about background scope, some solution options, also want to highlight some current activity and give a staff recommendation for a proposed course of action. Next. So back in December at the Mayor's Institute on City Design and Report, this idea was introduced in conversation topic of how to increase livable stock and reduce the amount of vacant properties that are just sitting out there that for any other reason the owners are not really incentivized to turn those properties into usable spaces. Again, this conversation was around residential properties and being considered as a solution to increasing housing stock and decreasing that gap in available housing. In March, Council asked Community Development if this idea or concept could be looked at for commercial spaces, primarily in our TIF districts. So we thank you for the question, the opportunity to do some research. It's been an interesting a challenge to look at and see what the options even are, as well as what's really going on across the country. Next slide. So for a commercial building vacancy registration program, we found a couple of really great examples, but the successful examples all tended to be around the major city centers, Detroit, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., which clearly is not where we're at. And these commercial vacant property registrations really targeted large multi-unit properties, both commercial and just vacant properties that were really susceptible to encampments and vandalism and being overrun if left vacant and unattended. And the registry program and associated fees primarily focused at providing additional support for law enforcement to provide additional coverage, and as well as human services to provide services and support to residents that had taken up in space in these buildings. We only found one such program in Oregon, and this is exact opposite scale in a very, very small town that has a really dynamic historic district, and their commercial property registration really targeted funding the historic district preservation, administrative costs, and the fees were minimal in such a space. Programs like these are very complex, both to establish and run, and in both cases, for the purposes of the City of Tigard, the administrative burdens would far outweigh any return on the program. We also don't believe that a registration program such as this would be an effective deterrent or an additional incentive to encourage property owners to turn their spaces into leasable spaces. Next slide. We also looked at what we currently have within the city to see what options we have. Instead of going down the path of going through a vacancy registration, was there anything in our current code that we could really tap into and look at? And what we found is that our municipal code already has provisions under safety or human health related complaints that we can look at dangerous structures, whether they're vacant or occupied, and make sure that there's no danger to human health, either structurally or environmentally. Through this opportunity, it doesn't just target vacant properties or units, but also can provide for the safety and welfare of units and spaces that are currently leased, especially those that invite public into their spaces. City can confirm if there's structural issues, again, if there's any environmental issues like mold or anything that needs to be mitigated before these spaces are deemed safe for public. Community development staff does think that this remains our best course of action, and I would like to share with you a success story. About a month ago, we initiated this exact process through our code compliance officer to look at 2 buildings that had complaints on them of potential mold and structural issues. The owners of the buildings were incredibly receptive to receiving notice of a complaint, immediately engaged with the city on what they needed to do to remedy the problems, have hired environmental consultants and engineers to look at the issues that have been identified with their buildings, and are currently going through the permitting process to have contractors fix their spaces and bring those up to current code. So in just a month, we've seen activity on 2 spaces that have been deemed chronically vacant within the downtown district. And we've had a really great positive working relationship with the owners of those buildings, which does lead us to believe that the owners are incentivized to lease their spaces. They just didn't necessarily know how to get to that point. Next slide. As you can see, we've got a couple different ways to get to this code compliance or initial action with property owners. We have both derelict structures and dangerous structures. And again, really this comes down to safety for the public. Chronic dereliction, public nuisance, hazards to health and safety, or excessive damage or deterioration. What we've been able to successfully get to is the excessive damage or deterioration. Additional work within the city. Next slide, please. Remains to move in a forward direction with some current activity, which is a project between planning and our code enforcement, who are working through the process of updating current municipal code to incorporate the International Property Maintenance Code. This code really is industry standard for best practice, and this is a regular practice already within the city of Tigard. This code gets updated about every 3 years, in which city of Tigard does go through and update municipal code to align with industry best practice. So this is, our current code is based on the 2021 version of this publication. And again, current activity is going through and updating municipal code in alignment with 2024. Now, this has primarily been for residential or non-commercial buildings, but the best practices do carry over and give us additional resources and verbiage to look at and get eyes on commercial spaces. Next slide. So our proposed course of action is to stay the course and use our current tools, continue to work with property owners, and really relay the importance of keeping their properties up to code on the maintenance standards, as well as enforcing the safety aspect of those buildings. And then longer term, to consider any additional activities or actions if council decides to move in the direction of wanting to track or register or create a more formal process for vacant properties. And the recommendation going forward, if that is something that council wants to undertake, that it would not just look at commercial properties, but would be in coordination with activities surrounding residential or non-commercial properties, which is pretty much the industry standard across the country for registry type processes. We do want to highlight that this would be an additional program that would be very labor intensive and would have significant costs that go along with it, and just want to be mindful of the budgetary cycle to incorporate a project like this that would be a multi-year cycle. Next slide. And that concludes our presentation. Welcome any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Yeah, Councilor Wolf?
No, thank you, and thank you, Sean. I think you touched on what was going to be my question. The success story that you shared, was that a complaint that was filed then and then followed up, and we were okay. And I think because what my wondering was, right, is the proactive, which is the labor piece and the intensity of knocking on doors to, yeah. And so support the direction, certainly have an interest to have that more proactive approach, recognizing that there's going to be a resource cost that's attached to that. But that's kind of where I am. So thank you for great information.
Thank you.
Council President Hill?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for sharing the story of the landlord wanting to fix the problem. Do you have any sense of them? Is that the next step for them, is just to rent it out? Do you have a sense that they're ready to rent it out after they fix everything?
Well, I would say that laying out money to support the building is probably an incentive to get it leased, and it's also probably conversely the fact that the building has been repaired is going to make it more attractive to leasers.
Got it. All right. And in terms of the proposed long-term registration, vacant registration for both residential and non-residential vacant lots, I understand it's going to be cost associated with it, and that just brings me back to another initiative that the city teammate was proposing, was the landlord registration. And I'm just curious about the comparable costs and teammate, time, effort. I mean, both sounds like to me will be cost intensive and labor intensive and long term. I'm just trying to get a sense of which one, cost benefit analysis for both programs. I don't know if you will be able to provide that comparison. I don't think Skylar's here anymore, but
I had a great conversation with Skylar earlier today about this.
Okay.
So the other initiative that is just starting conversation, working through what it might look like, is the rental registration and inspection program. So that is more a program more in line with what we originally heard about, which is the incentivizing available residential building stock to be made leasable and not sit vacant or empty because we need housing so desperately.
yeah.
The programs might not need to be independently run if it's something that you want to do, because the fundamentals of either we go through with the initiative to say we're going to inventory and register vacant properties, or we're not going to. That you wouldn't need to run a separate vacant property registration program necessarily, because the end goal would still be to get an awareness of vacant properties, whether that's commercial, residential, or vacant lots, and then also work with those owners to best utilize those properties in the needs of the community and in the needs of the city going forward. So it wouldn't be a cost comparison, pick one program over the other. It would be how is the program designed to meet the needs of the city if an avenue like that wants to be investigated.
But they both will require labor, right?
Absolutely.
To administer and
Absolutely.
run. So there is a cost, because your time is money, it's valuable, right?
Yes.
So even though monetary wise maybe it's not easily readily visible, but in terms of labor costs, it's still there. So to me, since I mean, from previous council meeting, I'm not sold that landlord tenant registration program will actually achieve the goal intent. But other cities have done, vacant property tracking for residential property, and the goal is to give people incentive to rent out their property, because if you don't rent it out, we're going to impose a fee on you. And I know that the city of Vancouver, BC have done that. And the goal is actually, one of the problem with housing crisis is supply. So if we can increase supply, hopefully that will solve the problem. So to me, since both programs, the landlord registration and vacancy registration, will demand teammate time, if I have to pick one, I will pick the vacant registration over the tenant registration. So that's just my preference.
I do want to clarify that it wouldn't be tenant registration, it would be rental inspection
right.
and rental registration. So registration for leasable housing.
Right. Yeah, that's
which
why I
would
meant.
be a subcomponent of a citywide vacant property registration program,
right.
if that's the way council wants to move. And I don't have any numbers or additional data
Right.
on that initiative.
Yeah, so I just want to bring it up in case other council member also agree with me that if we have to pick one, I will pick the vacant registration over Damn, I can't keep remembering.
Rental registration
Registration
and
program,
inspection
yeah.
program.
Yeah, I will pick the vacant one over that one. So
The bigger, broader program.
which one is broader?
The vacant property would be a much larger program.
Okay, I will-
Than
I-
just
yeah.
focusing on rental properties.
Yeah, I will pick that one over the other.
Thank you.
I also want to clarify that the rental property, the goal wasn't just to get more people housed, it was ensuring that the people who are in housing actually have safe housing, which we know that there are many people in Tigard who do not have safe housing who are renting. And so the goals of the programs are very different. It's not just registering people who are renting, it's ensuring the tenants living there have humane living conditions.
I understand, and the problem I have with that is I ask many times for data to support that this program will achieve the goal, but so far I haven't received none. And I just can't support a program that I don't see success stories for, so that's my problem.
Yeah, no, I understand. It hasn't come back and we haven't pushed it forward, but I
Right.
just wanted to clarify in this conversation that the goals of these two programs are very different, although they could run in parallel and probably share resources and registration and perhaps just have a different box to check or whatever it is. Councillor Shaw?
Thank you. I have not read the International Property Maintenance Code 2024.
It's
And have you read it in detail?
No.
I'd hate to say, it looks thick just by the picture. And I'll put it on the list to do at some point. You mentioned it's focused on residential, but could expand to include non-residential. So does that code include commercial?
It does. The language and best practices in the code can include application for commercial, and it's really expansion of those health and safety factors, getting a little more granularity on structural stability, inspectable items, and then also what can go into code compliance. And if we do need any further details on that, I know that the project is currently being undertaken, and it's a joint project between senior planning and code compliance. So people way smarter than me that look at it and go,
No
that
problem.
understand exactly what those
I just
code
wasn't sure if
changes
it
mean.
included it, so that's good to know.
Yes.
And another reason to read it. When you say long-term, what do you mean by long-term? Because what's the back of my mind is Tyler, and ensuring that that is going to be focused on with the resources we have and not adding new projects. So can you define what short-term timing is versus long-term timing?
Absolutely not in this budget year, because we don't have the staff or the budget to pursue a project like this. As I said, it would take additional staff to start and run a program like this. So looking 1 to 3 budget years out once the decision is made.
Great, thank you. And by then, hopefully we'll have Tyler implemented, and I would share similar concerns and maybe viewpoints that Council President Hu had mentioned, but recognizing too, we don't have all the data we need. So just thank you for the conversation.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. I think, I've had a lot of conversations with businesses kind of surrounding this, and it sort of feels like there's a couple of issues going on. There's buildings being run down and not being habitable, and then there are buildings not being leased and not actively trying to lease the space that they have. And both things are going on all over the city. It's really frustrating for a lot of businesses who are on the verge of not being able to continue their rental, their leases, because one of the examples given to me is the costs that used to have 50 tenants in the space now have 17. And so all of the overhead is being shared between 17 businesses instead of 50. But there is no active attempt to be leasing the additional space to share that burden. And the request was really finding a way to sort of incentivize or punish, I guess, depending upon on the way we go, whether carrot or stick, understanding the building rundown can be solved through code compliance. But figuring out a way, because our businesses are bearing that burden of us not somehow incentivizing or having a stick for those additional rental spaces being utilized. Also acknowledging it's a fine balance because the world has changed and people don't need as much office space. So I think and this is not a Tigard specific problem, but I'm hoping we can continue to be clever and cutting edge in the way that we are perhaps dealing with it or incentivizing it, or perhaps starting to incentivize buildings who are not being leased to their capacity. What else can you do with that space so it doesn't sit vacant, so those businesses aren't bearing the burden? So that is my request, to continue to think about it with that mindset too, because it's a great story that people are going to invest and hopefully do that. I also continue to struggle with complaint driven and not proactive, and the uncomfortable position it puts someone in to complain, and to have that on record as being the individual. I think it feels terrible as a neighbor. I think it feels terrible as a business owner, and we pit people against each other rather than proactively finding a solution. Understanding it is a dollar figure, which is why we are not, I understand all of that. So I'm thinking big picture and long term, and hopefully not super long term, but I want to find a way to help those businesses who are shouldering that burden that's not fair for them because it's putting them to the edge.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I do want to clarify some of the challenge too. We have a very different challenge for our downtown non-residential spaces compared to our Tigard Triangle office park spaces, compared to new development spaces. And we are also in a position where most of the structure is designed on vacant buildings. We don't have many vacant buildings. We have partially vacant. And that changes what we can do and what we're allowed to do. And for us, best practice is to continue to work with those individual owners to find out what their challenges are and help them move forward.
Is that because of city-specific or state-specific regulations dependent upon occupancy percentage?
It gets into the structure and the examples that we've been able to find are vacant buildings. And so it gets into the owner's rights, and it gets into the very deep weeds of the legal system on the classification of those spaces. And the vacant units within spaces are classified very differently compared to vacant properties.
I think that's a really important distinction, especially for the issues that our businesses are going on that are having. But I'd be interested to continue exploring it, and even if it's deep into the weeds, I'm looking at you, City Attorney Rahala, for that, not me. Because I think, Councilor Wolf.
And Mayor, I just had one other question, but I didn't want to interrupt your. Again, the presentation I felt was a bit fluid as we talked specifically about commercial, but also possibly long-term residential and the examples of success as well. And when we talk about funding, I find it a little ironic that our next presentation up is reducing homelessness goals. So as we talk about how we spend money, I don't want to look in a silo of what's in development versus what's in strategic initiatives, when maybe one solves and helps the other in how we look at our budget and do some of these vacancy strategies around how we register. And so anyway, I think that has been on my mind a lot that's coming up, and so I look at, is this an opportunity that's in just the residential, maybe not commercial, but I feel like we've kind of covered both. So I just wanted to share that. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I'm curious because, like, in my gut, I don't feel like we have a residential vacancy problem. And part of that is probably also because we do not allow short-term rentals in the city of Tigard. So there are not houses sitting open waiting for somebody to come in for an Airbnb or whatever. I feel like our vacancy or partial vacancy issue is really truly in our commercial space. I don't know that, and you know, it would be helpful, I guess, to have data to back that up. But that's a gut feeling for me because I think we're in such a housing crisis unless somebody has so much money that they just sit on a house, which I just don't see as a wide rampant problem, where commercial is different, especially because of, you know, post-COVID, whether or not individuals are leasing office space anymore. Council, go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
No.
Office space is very different than commercial, retail, or eating and drinking establishments. And I will say in the downtown area, we have more interested businesses who want to come in and do business than we have available buildings to put them in. So in areas, yes, but it's very sector specific and building floor plate specific of what those vacancies are. And Mary, you touched on it earlier, this is a nationwide problem on vacant office space that does not have any other use. And this is a problem across the entire country. But we are also starting to see the trend of businesses coming back to office, and we're also seeing the trend of major businesses moving out of the major metropolitan downtown core into neighborhoods more like Tigard. So the data is trending positive towards getting office tenants back into those office spaces. And again, it's going to be working with those building owners to make sure that they're ready to receive tenants when the interest does pick back up.
Council President Hu, did you have something to add?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank Councilor Wolf for bringing up that point, because that's something I forgot to mention, that even though the vacancy registration program might be bigger, but if we can solve two problems with one program, in the long term, it might be a more efficient program to have, right? Both commercial and residential. And to Mayor Loop's point of vacant residential properties, I read an article, I believe on New York Times a year ago, actually report a high percentage of vacant residential property in Oregon. I'm sure it's not specific to Tigard, I'm sure it's not, but it actually report a high number of vacant residential property in the Oregon area, maybe even the Portland region. So I agree that more data, we need to see what the actual residential vacancy rate is, because I don't know why I don't know. So
Yeah, I can certainly see vacancies in destinations like the Coast and Bend and Sisters for second homes. Okay, any additional comments to wrap up? I don't know, did we give you guidance or did we just have a very robust discussion?
Very robust and appreciated discussion, and we can definitely look at some data and get you guys some numbers and try to dig a little bit deeper into what the trends are specifically in Tigard, so that we can really identify what areas need further investigation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next item on our agenda is a reduced houselessness goal update, and we have Strategic Initiatives Manager Azelle to give the city teammate report. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you.
I don't know who that one was. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I am Kim Ezell, Program Manager for Strategic Initiatives. I just want to start this presentation about reduce houselessness and our goal update, how I think I've introduced all of these, which is I'm the one who gets to sit in front of you this evening giving this report, but this work is being done by tens, if not hundreds of people working in nonprofits and government across this region, and just want to acknowledge all of that really important work that they're doing before this discussion tonight. Next slide, please. So tonight we have two objectives. One, I want to demonstrate the progress that we've made on the council goal of reducing houselessness. I'm very excited to talk about this and about how we've been executing on the strategies that council outlined a year and a half ago. And then also to seek direction from council on how to use our resources for the next 6 months. Not looking for any formal action this evening, but general guidance and priorities from council. And then also asking if there's any information that you need for future decision making. Next slide, please. So a year and a half ago, council identified reduce houselessness as one of 4 council goals with 3 desired outcomes, creating a more available transitional housing with wraparound services, and then city support for the business community to offset the impacts of houselessness. And next slide, please. As part of those outcomes, City Council also identified 5 strategies. This evening I'll go through each of those 5 strategies and talk about the progress that city teammates and the county and our other nonprofit partners have been making on these strategies. Next slide, please. So we begin by talking about efforts to create more transitional housing and wraparound services. Next slide. First thing I have to say is that in the last year and a half, we have done a lot. Shelter options have increased dramatically. The first big accomplishment being the addition of a family shelter growing to 70 beds. This is the Family Promise of Tualatin Valley Bridge to Home shelter. Also provides all kinds of other services within their building, including food and clothing closets, case management, mental health services. This building has only been open and active for a year, and I know that Rose Money, their executive director, has a lot more planned for that space and excited to see what comes next. Our other work in progress right now is adult shelter. So Just Compassion is under construction right now to expand their shelter from 20 adult beds to 60 adult beds. Also expanding their resource center, which is going to include expanded hours. They'll be going from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., serving 3 meals. It will also provide Tigard a actual emergency weather shelter that will serve 50 individuals during emergency weather events. This is very exciting and coming later this year / early next year for opening. And finally, we announced just last week that we are starting the Safe Parking Program. We're starting it here at City Hall. The goal is to create 3 of these safe parking locations across the city, serving 9 households at a time, and looking to expand that over the next year and a half. Next slide, please. In addition to those 3 works that we either have accomplished or that are in progress, we have one other opportunity that's being proposed by the county, and it's about pod villages. So a little bit of background. Washington County has established 3 safe rest villages in Cornelius, Aloha, and Hillsborough. Each serve 30 households at each location. They're all managed by the shelter operator Open Door, and they have been since they began over a year ago. And these have been established as a temporary solution as more permanent shelter is built. So, like I said, Tigard expanding from 20 to 60, Beaverton and Hillsborough, both building permanent shelters that will increase shelter capacity. But in the meantime, we still have folks that need shelter, and the pod villages are being used as that bridge between now and then. Next slide, please. The Safe Rest Village in Hillsborough is located on what will be their future shelter site, so it will be closing down at the end of this year for construction to begin. Washington County is interested in moving that Safe Rest Village to Southeast Washington County. Like I said, the 3 current locations are Cornelius, Aloha, and Hillsborough, so definitely in West Washington County. We don't have a good option in Southeast Washington County. These Safe Rest villages are fully funded by the county as well, so there would be no financial impact for the city. Next slide, please. So through this presentation, I will have a series of policy considerations, but we'll come back to all of them at the end of the presentation as well. But for Safe Rest Pod Village, the question for council is, should Tigard continue exploring partnering with Washington County to establish a Safe Rest Pod Village? And if that answer is yes, or the guidance is this is a priority, should the city explore the Pod Village at the newly acquired property on Hunsaker and Wall? Next slide, please. Second, I will talk about our adoption of a time, place, and manner ordinance and some of the impacts of its implementation. I also want to note that when we adopted time, place, manner last year, it was added that we were going to do an update on the implementation of time, place, manner every 6 months. So this presentation is also serving as that 6-month update. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on time, place, and manner. In July last year, City of Tigard established our time, place, manner ordinance. We are allowing camping, but only between 7 p.m. and 9 a.m. We have specifically not prohibited camping on some downtown city-owned properties, specifically City Hall, outside the Public Works Building, and the library, and some limited other areas. And then we have rules prohibiting some behaviors to keep public property maintained and available for public use. And this isn't on the slide, but I just wanted to note that this allowing camping on city property or somewhere in the city is required by state law, HB 3115, and so that is why we adopted this last year. Next slide, please. So since last year, all jurisdictions have been updating and reviewing their ordinances, and there have been several changes. Most notably in Portland, recently they have proposed and actually enacted new public camping regulations. Things change fast in the time, place, manner rule, and the slides can't always keep up. So these went into effect late May. The new rules effectively eliminated all time and place restrictions, but made it bolstered up the manner restrictions. And then they also encouraged diversion over criminal penalties and clarified that you can only be camping if there are absolutely no other alternate shelters available. So really wanted to emphasize that, which I do want to say is also within our code as well. There was also one change that was intended to make their rules more strict. When the code was originally adopted, they required that law enforcement provide anybody camping who was breaking those rules to be issued 3 warnings before being issued a fine or perhaps jail time. Since that has been enacted over the last year, law enforcement has found that very difficult to track and kind of know what warnings have been issued for which behaviors. If you've been issued warnings for different behaviors, does that count as 3 warnings, or are those in 2 different streams? So they've removed that, and now it's one, when you are found to be breaking the rules, then you can be issued a fine or jail time, though they do still seek to try to divert folks into shelter rather than issue any other sort of punishment. Beaverton is also making one change. So last year we changed our ordinance to allow camp stoves when people are camping, to allow people to warm themselves during the cold months as well as cook food. Beaverton is going to adopt Tigard's language, or look at adopting Tigard's language later this year. And one of our goals has always been to align jurisdictions as much as possible. So we see this as being positive. Hillsborough is updating their rules to require 36 inches of space on sidewalks in accordance with ADA. This was already in our rules. And then they have they designated some specific campsites, a couple vacant lots that the city owned that were not developed. What they found is that when folks are using those sites during the day, there was a lot of wear and tear. So while those are still allowed for nighttime camping, they are prohibiting the use of those spaces during the day and closing them. Next slide, please. And this is where I cut to City Attorney Rajala for a Supreme Court update.
So I just want to take a quick detour down the legal context. So Johnson v. Grants Pass is the case that's currently pending at the U.S. Supreme Court. The court heard oral arguments April 22nd of this year, and the decision is expected probably end of this month. So the top bullet is the question that the court, the actual yes or no question that the court is considering. So whether enforcement constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. So the 2 perspectives are, the city is arguing that the ordinances merely bar camping on public property by everyone. It's a generally applicable ordinance, and therefore we're not targeting specific individuals. The appellants are arguing that the laws effectively make it a crime to be homeless. So the court, the Robinson v. California decision in 1962 is really the context that the court is considering this under. So that case said that you cannot criminalize conduct. You can, or status. You cannot criminalize status. You can criminalize conduct. So in that case, the court looked at a California law that prohibited being a drug addict. The court said that you cannot prohibit being an addict. You can prohibit using drugs, selling drugs, but not the actual status. So the analogy here is houselessness a status or is it conduct? So the questions at the bottom are some of the key questions that the justices raised during oral argument. So focusing on that essential question of is houselessness status or is conduct? And there was a lot of discussion about that. Also, as came up in the Boise case, the previous U.S. Supreme Court case, the court didn't hear the Boise case, but it went up to the court. The individualized determination on available shelter. So this is, if the shelter doesn't allow pets and the person has a pet, is that an actual available shelter? If it's a men's shelter and the person is a woman, is that an available shelter? So for purposes of enforceability, how do you determine if shelter is actually available? And then the last point, so under judicial interpretation construct, if you can decide, if the court can decide the case without having to look to the constitutionality, they will do that. And so in this case, one of the justices said, Oregon has a law, House Bill 3115. So regardless of the constitutional outcome, the statute still stands. So do we even need to reach this Eighth Amendment question? Can we just look at the statute and say we're done? So there is a chance that the court won't even address the constitutionality in this case. So The Atlantic had a good headline earlier this week. It said, a Supreme Court ruling on houselessness that's both crucial and useless. And so I think that's it captured it very well in terms of the actual outcome of this case, is that it is not going to address houselessness, it is not going to address any of the actual issues, but it could be very important in terms of the regulatory legal structure for how cities address this. So stay tuned for the end of this month.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So while we wait for the Supreme Court's final ruling, we do have some considerations when it comes to implementation. So we've got 4 that I'll have listed here. The first is enforcement. So Tigard's Focus Patrol Officer has been engaging with the campers daily. We mostly find campers around our library, although we also are seeing some folks camping at City Hall and Public Works. He meets with them every morning and gets folks to kind of pack up their belongings. And then we have a second officer who's now been engaged on the FPO's day off. So our Focus Patrol officers' hours are Monday through Thursday, and then we have a second officer who's on the other shift from Friday through Sunday. Our priorities remains connecting folks with services and educating folks about the rules before any sort of penalization. And we've had very few campers being excluded from our property for repeated violations of the ordinances. Most folks, once they kind of become familiar with the rules, are following them and staying with the guidelines that we've put in place. Next slide, please. We are still hearing quite a few community concerns. Like I mentioned, most folks who are camping behind the library. When we hear from library patrons pretty regularly, as well as the weather and the daylight hours have been changing through the summer. It's more visible around the library. There are not necessarily more people camping there, but it is more visible from folks who are driving by. We continue to educate the community about council's goals, services in the community, and the legal requirements of HB 3115. And also want to acknowledge that the library remains, both inside and outside, one of the few places people can spend their time without making a purchase, especially in the hot summer months and the cold and rainy winter ones. Next slide, please. We have been also seeing an issue with accessibility into our buildings. Some folks have been camping on city sidewalks, which is legal under the current code, specifically sidewalks that are underneath overhangs. This has started to create some conflicts with community members trying to access buildings and services, while folks cannot camp in a way that impedes 36 inches of space. 36 inches does not necessarily mean that someone feels comfortable walking by, especially when someone might be camping next to the book drop. We also see some conflicts where now that there are spaces that are overhangs that are legal for camping, but there's very few of them, that there are some conflicts that are occurring between folks who are camping because there are quote unquote better spaces available. So we want to consider addressing that going forward. Next slide, please. The last consideration is around belongings. Teammates and community members have been seeing belongings stored on city property, sometimes for long periods of time. We do not currently have restrictions about storing belongings, and there is a balance here. We encourage folks to store some belongings on city property. We love it when people bike here and lock their bikes onto our bike racks for either work or recreation. However, storing tents, backpacks, or large bike trailers of their belongings for weeks at a time is not the intended use of our city storage facilities. So trying to just find a balance in that area, and so that's why we've been thinking about and want to propose a 48-hour restriction on belongings and how long folks can have things belong on city property before they must be removed. This isn't without precedent. Hillsborough has something similar, although theirs is only a 3-hour. I don't believe that that is really reasonable for what we're currently seeing at Tigard, especially when we don't have a reasonable alternative for folks to store their belongings during the day. However, there is good news on the horizon. I mentioned earlier Just Compassion's Resource Center. That does include a dedicated space for folks who are camping outside to store their belongings during the day, but that was not going to be available until early next year. So next slide, please. Previous slide. Through all of those, we do have 3 considerations. The first being, should Tigard explore a designated campsite, possibly at the newly acquired property? Like I mentioned, Hillsborough is using vacant undeveloped property for their designated campsite. Tualatin and Sherwood also have designated campsites, and it may address some of the community concerns and the visibility that we're currently experiencing at some of our current allowed campsites. The second being, should we expand prohibited camping areas to include all paved areas of city property to reduce those accessibility as well as conflicts? And the last being, should the city create new restrictions that limit storing belongings on city property to no more than 48 hours? And next slide. Let's see, these next 3 are going to be rather quick. So the third council strategy was to create a grant program to support small businesses. Next slide. And I won't go into too much detail here because actually Mr. Engel earlier this evening really covered this topic, but yes, Tigard did create the Small Business Sustainability Fund, and there was an update from the CEO of the chamber earlier this evening on this topic. Next slide, please. The fourth strategy was to secure ongoing state funding. Next slide. While we haven't secured ongoing state funding, we were able to secure federal funding and ongoing county funding. So we have a federal earmark to hire 1 community service officer to address houselessness in the community. And that position, the hiring process is underway now. And then we also secured a IGA with Washington County to hire 1 houselessness liaison for Southeast Washington County. This liaison will serve Tigard, Tualatin, and Sherwood, but be housed in Tigard, and this is ongoing funding, and this posting will also go live soon. So excited to have these 2 resources under our belt. Next slide. And the last strategy that came from the council goal was to provide council with options for tenant protection. I think this was also spoken at some length earlier this evening, so I won't go into great detail, but next slide. Skylar Warren from Community Development has led those briefings. There have been 3 total, with the latest one was last fall, and there will be another briefing scheduled for later this year to talk about tenant protection options. And next slide. So that is our update on our progress on the 5 strategies. I'm really excited to be able to talk about all of the great accomplishments and how we've been able to really move forward on all 5 of the strategies, and would like to go back to some of these policy considerations. And again, just hear guidance from council on we've done all of this for the last year and a half and what should be our priorities looking at the last 6 months of this goal. So next slide. And I'm happy to go back through the policy considerations or turn it over to you, Mayor.
Can we have next slide? Because then it just goes through questions one by one. So we can go ahead. Thank you for giving us an update on everything. We can start with this question. I also just want to start with centering, but this is a really hard discussion that we have up here with no good, right, or wrong answers. And it is incredibly difficult for our city teammates and ourselves and our community members to continue to treat everyone with kindness and the dignity and respect that they deserve, while also enforcing the laws and ordinances that we have on our books and having a challenging discussion on what is the right balance. And so I believe all of the city teammates and all of the council up here are kind, good people who want to find the right answer. And as we have this conversation centering good intent, because this could potentially be challenging. So I want to start with that by acknowledging those sorts of things. So with that said, would anyone like to kick us off with the Safe Rest Pod Village and whether or not Tigard should explore partnering with Washington County? Okay, I was like, yeah, Council President who or Councilor Wolf? Oh, Council President who?
Ding, ding, ding. Okay. Yeah, so as Mayor mentioned, it's a tough challenge, right? It's a tough decision. And I think I may start with an even tougher question for you is, when it's great to look at those accomplishments, right? We provide so much help, and I think it's just great we can help people. But on the other hand, when I look at this, creating more shelter and stuff like that, it reminds me of parallel of people from transportation point of view. I will get there while I'm talking about this. People always say you should just build more lanes on the highway. You will make the traffic flow better. But we all know this thing called induced demand. The more lane you build, the more car they will attract, and ultimately we'll go back to gridlock. So I use this parallel to shelters. I'm not trying to be heartless, but I'm just afraid that the more we build, the more they will come, and we'll end up to where we started up with. So I guess the $1 million question is, has anybody ever figured out, how do we truly help people of our community? I'm not trying to be protectionist or anything, but I truly want to help Tigard community. But at the same time, I'm concerned that when we keep building this shelter, we will attract people not from Tigard area or even from Washington County. They just keep coming and coming. So sorry to put you on this tough spot, but this $1 million question, has everybody figured out a solution of helping people, our neighbors, but while not attracting more people needing help? I guess not, because if we have, then we already solved that problem, but maybe, I don't know.
I can't say that anybody has solved that particular problem. I am very interested. There's 2 reports that unfortunately won't be coming out before this presentation that I think will offer more of an answer to kind of what it is that we really need. One will be the SHS report, their annual report, which will come out in October of this year, which will report on what they were doing, what progress they've seen in the last year, and then we'll also talk about what they're looking for next year and what they're planning to invest in. And one of those investments is in this new vocab word for everyone, which is transitional housing. So we've been talking a lot about emergency shelter, and then we talk a lot about housing, and then this middle ground of what's transitional housing. So the things like permanent supportive housing or specific housing for folks who are trying to exit or get help for a substance use disorder. So building up kind of this whole bridge that gets people into what is ultimately the solution we're all looking for, which is everybody in stable and secure housing,
Right.
which is the only real solution. The second report that we're also eagerly awaiting is the point-in-time count. So the last full point-in-time count was done almost exactly a year and a half ago. This last year, it was only a shelter count that was done, and what we saw was that there were more people who were in shelter, which is what we'd expect because there's more shelter. But next year, we'll also see the audit or the census of folks who are living outside, and I'm very interested in that number that shows what type of change we've been seeing in Washington County. So I don't know if I answered your question,
Yeah,
but it was a
it's
really
very
tough
helpful
one.
actually. So remind me again, when you do point of time count, do you ask people who they are from, or are they from out of state, from out of area, or from out of city?
I believe one of the questions that we do both in our phase 1 assessments as well as in the point in time count is when you were last housed, what community were you housed in? It is an optional question, so not everybody chooses to answer that, but it is on the questionnaire.
Okay, so going back to the policy consideration, my answer for the first one is maybe. I mean, sure, we should help people, but with the reservation I just explained. And the second one, should we use our newly acquired property on Hunsaker Ward? Well, I do not think we should, because I want to remain. The whole reason we purchased that property is for a new city facility, and I want us to have maximum flexibility if we are ready to build. I don't want to have the problem of, we have a pop village there and it's there, we have contract for 2 years. What happens if we're ready to build in year 1.5 or year 1? Then we can go forward with that, and I don't think community members will appreciate that. So my my answer to the second question is no.
Thank you.
Councilor Wolf?
Thank you, Mayor. And first, Kim, you and the team that you use, which I think has mostly been you, just really deserves to be commended. That when you look at what was the goal, what were the strategies, how did I attack it, and boom, 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 you've done all that. So the first thing I want to say is thank you, and you really got after this. So I need to say that to say what I wonder, and I know you know what I'm going to say, is has the goal around reduced homelessness or houselessness really evolved to where Tigard, and this follows a lot the council president who just said, we've become an anchor resource for the county, somewhat southeast Washington County, which gives me pause. And so I too am very similar to council president who, in trying to understand, are we solving the problem for our Tigard community and lifting them up, or have we become a broader space that is supporting those within the county or maybe outside the county that have found their way here as a place to get supports? And what I wrestle with, and I know this isn't directly answering the question, and this is where it gets complex and hard, because I think it's such a bigger conversation. What I wrestle with is we have this conversation around houselessness, but there's so many different categories, right? I mean, my goodness, the Family Justice Center talking about what they're doing to support domestic violence victims and their families. What is the group in terms of drug addiction or mental health crisis that creates some of those conflicts, that creates challenges? We all have to have space and heart for those that just had the perfect storm of life and need some space just to be safe. And they're all different buckets, but we kind of talk like this, and then that becomes very challenging for me to kind of, well, then what's the answer to question number 1? So having said all of that, I'm going to mirror Council President Hu. I don't want to say no, because it seems like that's another opportunity, but I also am curious about some of our friends that live around us that haven't offered up a resource yet. And I wonder sometimes if it's House Bill 3115 on the question of you, or Grants Pass, that at what point have you offered supply that's fair, that meets your demand? Or are you forever going to be on this treadmill the demand keeps going, so your supply is never going to hit there. So then it will never be like, no, we've met that demand in our community. So I'm not saying no to the first, but I definitely agree with creating flexibility on the new space. And I'm not looking for that to be where those pods would land. So I hope that helped, clear as mud.
Councillor Shaw?
Thank you. Thank you for the robust conversation, and Mayor for setting the stage for what is a difficult conversation. And Kim, to you and the credit of both the teammates, but also the hundreds of others who have been working on this issue. You've done a tremendous job in helping the council get closer to, we may never achieve the goal, but the goal of wanting to achieve the goal. We have the family shelter, which is exciting news with the Bridge to Home. We have the adult shelter with Just Compassion. Hi, Caleb. I'm very excited about that, and the resources for potentially the belongings also being stored. And then we have safe parking. A lot of resources we don't yet know what the impact's going to be. You had also mentioned on the reports that we're still waiting for, the SHS report, the point and count in time. So because of that, I would be a solid no for partnering with Washington County to establish a safe rest pod village, primarily because I think there are other communities in our Southeast Washington that haven't stepped up. I'm a little afraid about becoming that anchor resource when I think there are others who could also provide resources who actually have lots of land, are not land strapped as Tigard is. And in addition, we worked very hard to get that property, and it is going to be utilized eventually for public works and for potentially police. So very similar to my colleagues, I'd be concerned about utilizing that property when we might need it sooner rather than later. So with that, I would be a no on the first question, and then a no on the second question as well. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you for this guidance and this discussion. I think it's challenging because we are the city of Tigard, and SHS funding and the county are houselessness is a county-wide program with individual spots in the cities that make up the entire program. And my pause is we have a lot going on, and I feel like we haven't, we're not on stable ground of understanding where the city of Tigard is right now without adding something large and additional. And I am also in the same boat where I think, Tigard has absolutely stepped up to the plate. And I would like to see our other partners do that, because I constantly hear another mayor say, well, I don't have a problem. And it's like, well, that's because you put them in a car and you put them to Tigard. And it's shameful, right? Like, it is shameful behavior. And I want some of our regional partners to step up and to take that space. And so my focus, my desire for the city is to focus on the initiatives that we have and perhaps bring this back up next year or along those lines. But as far as on Hunziker and Wall, for me, that would initially feel like a huge bait and switch. We bought this property and we told you it's going to be for this, but we're going to do this with it. And that, to me, I think, I try to be as honest as possible, and that would feel like a huge break in trust with our community, saying that we're going to do one thing with the property and turning around and doing it for something else. And so I'm a no on Hunziker and Wall, also appreciating that we need the flexibility to be able to do, because we have a crisis with our buildings. It's a different crisis, but it's still sort of a crisis. So I think there's fairly clear guidance that exploring the partnership with Washington County for the Safe Rest Pod Village is a no at this time, and a no on Hunziker and Wall. Does that feel like a pretty clear consensus? Okay. Yeah. Council President Hu?
Thank you. Just one follow-up question that's not totally related, but it's related to pod. But if a private property, let's say a church in Tigard, want to have a pod program, they can just go to county and form partnership, right? They do not need city's permission or help in any way. Is that true? Or
Technically, that is true, although the county would not pursue placing a pod village within any city if they did not have also the endorsement of the city, and they've been pretty clear about that.
What do you mean by endorsement?
Basically, that we would support and help with their communications efforts around placing that pod village. We wouldn't have to, there would be no formal support, but the city could not be opposed to the institution of a pod village.
Okay, so we don't need any city teammate, for example, your time involved at all?
Oh, technically, no, but I don't think the county would move forward if I wasn't involved in the communications efforts in some way.
Got it. Thank you. That's all I need.
Yeah, I think the county would look to partner with the city on reaching the community. And so, yeah, okay. We will move on to the next question, which is, let's see. 2 slides. Should the city expand prohibited camping areas to include all paved areas of the city property?
Mayor, can we go back to the designated campsite question?
Oh.
It's consideration number 2.
Oh, a designated campsite. Okay. Apologies. I thought that had to do. So should the Tigard explore a designated campsite, possibly at the newly acquired property? So rather than saying, allowing it at city property, it would say this is the campsite for the city of Tigard?
Yes, so instead of what we have now in place, which is disallowing it in most areas, which implies that we have allowed camping in some places, exploring a designated campsite somewhere in the city, but the most obvious location at this time would be Hunsaker Wall, as it is a vacant, undeveloped property that the city currently owns, which is in line with what Hillsborough, Sherwood, and Tualatin have all done.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to ask the question of, I assume if we had something available, we would have done that rather than having the time, place, and manner we do?
Yes, we do not have an obvious site available.
Yeah. So the question is really around whether or not to use the Hunsaker Wall as a designated campsite or not. Councillor Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. My recommendation would be no.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf?
I concur with Councillor Shaw. I wish there was an opportunity with a private partner, because we are so landlocked, to create that's a vacant property. So I think this is a great idea, a great strategy to create a designated space. But as a city owner, the opportunities aren't there. And I'm sure, Kim, that you've tried to create that opportunity somewhere. But in terms of Hunsaker, I continue to be no.
Thank you. Council President Hu?
I guess my argument against pod is a little bit weaker for tent because they are more easily removed. But on the other hand, I'm comfortable with 8 tents, but I don't know what's the mechanism for stopping more and making it into a tent village. So for that reason, unless we have a good way to control the number of tents there, my answer will be no.
I would just add, it would actually be more difficult to remove folks who are living in tents than a pod village. Pod village would have an operator and the pods that are there, and then a transition plan for removing folks. So I think your original point still stands, Council President.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more of if we have a contract with the county to have pod village there for 2 years, we'll be breaking a contract if we want them to move out earlier. For 10, it's a good point. It's if there's 8, 10 there, maybe it's no problem, but if there's 100 tents there, then yeah, that would be really difficult. So yeah, that was my point, but I appreciate your point as well. So
thank you.
I am also a no, for all of the reasons discussed. Should the city expand prohibited camping areas to include all paved areas of city property, going back to individuals having challenges accessing city services, conflicts between some of our houseless individuals over what could be considered more prime spots, which are undercover? Anyone want to, Council President Hu?
when you say paved proper area, that mean that can it is it just sidewalks when you say paved area?
Yes,
Okay.
our time, place, manner ordinance already prohibits folks from camping on the parking lots. So this would expand from just parking lots to include all of our sidewalks as well.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one for me, but I think Portland gets sued for ADA violation, right? Because the sidewalk was, yeah, I think I would support not allowing camping on sidewalks.
Councillor Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council President Hu. I too would, because one of our tenets is really to be a walkable, moving city, and that does impede those who, whether in a wheelchair or some other means of mobility or even walking, inhibits them from doing so. So in this case, I would say yes, though I have also heard and been a party to right behind the library where there's some prime grass space as well, and there's been some conflict there. So it's not just paved spots, it's grass spots as well. But in this case, I would say my answer would be yes.
Councillor Wolf?
I agree. I mean, I think if this is escalating behaviors, then if this is a way to mitigate that, then I support this decision.
I also support the decision based on all the discussion. The final question is, should the city create new restrictions that limit storing belongings on city property to no more than 48 hours? I have a question for you regarding this 48 hours. Hearing the changes that, for instance, the City of Portland made regarding having to track 3 warnings and those sorts of things, are we just simply adding it in a different kind of way, a challenge, by having to track what that 48-hour period looks like?
It would add a challenge for law enforcement with needing to see an item and then track it for 48 hours. It would largely probably fall on our focus patrol officer from some of the conversations I've had with the police department, but he was also having to try to get this person to move their belongings when we had an incident with somebody parking their bike trailer and taking up an entire bike rack last year. So he didn't really have any tools available. So while it does create an additional challenge and another onus on our law enforcement, it also gives them another tool for addressing some of our community's concerns.
Does anybody would like the police chief to, do you have any additional perspective that you could help on the burden perhaps it would put on our officers for tracking? My also concern is over, we know that we have 2 officers, and if someone is Monday through Thursday, what happens when you're cited on Thursday? I think of the practical application of this rather than something that feels good on paper.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate that, because it would be a challenge, and that's for those specific reasons. If we can't have a single person that monitors that specifically all the time, and it's not reasonable to think that we have somebody that works 7 days a week, right? It'll pose a challenge for us. We'll have to come up with some sort of mechanism to be able to keep track of it. But it gives us a tool that we don't have available to us now. So it could be an improvement, it could be a step in the right direction, and it's something that's not available to us as a tool right now that could, as Kim mentioned, in one case, we had a situation where we were unable to remove property because we didn't have a mechanism in order to do that. So this would give us a tool to move in that direction, and I think a more reasonable way to do it than maybe some of the things we've seen with some of our partners.
So perhaps something like this, as a temporary approving it, saying we will review it perhaps in 3 months to see if this tool is working as intended. That could be something that perhaps we could do to test it out.
I think it's totally reasonable. 3 months would give us enough time to be able to say, is this something that we can actually manage effectively? So that would be plenty of time, yes.
Thank you. Councilor Wolf, I saw your hand waving. I got you, and then I got you next, and then you just weren't in my peripheral vision. Yep.
Well, in my time of doing that, I because I appreciate the practical application. So my question kind of reminds me, I mean, it's very different, so I'm not making light of this, but that kind of max on parking. So I can only be there 2 hours, so I'm going to go around the block, and I'm going to find a spot 6 feet, down the street, and then I'm good for another 2 hours. So I guess I don't understand that backside of it, Chief, in terms of 48 hours, then what? I mean, so then I move my stuff and I get another 48 hours somewhere. I mean, how are you going to, that adds to that layer of monitoring, I guess is what I was wondering about. Thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. It would take that constant monitoring, and the officers we have that are working on these issues currently are really good at knowing whose property belongs to who. Now, that isn't to say that can always be the case, but they have a really good idea with almost every situation. They know whose property it is, and so they have the ability to work with people and to try and help them with that. And as more resources become available for, say, storage for personal property, some of these issues we anticipate will not be as challenging, but yes, it'll be difficult for us to monitor, but it's better than some of the options we currently have. And it gives us not only a tool, but it also gives some of the compassion piece that we're really trying to provide and trying to get people connected to the right level of services without just coming with a hammer and telling them nope with like a zero tolerance. This gives a little bit of room for that and allows us to work with some of our community partners to connect them to those services that we try to.
This feels like a situation where like perfect is the enemy of the good, which I personally have that's one of my challenges, trying to get it right the first time. Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'm struggling because I'm not trying to poke hole in your argument, Chief, but on one hand, you say the officer knows them pretty well and sounds like they have good relationship and you do not want to have a hammer down at them. But on the other hand, I feel like if we pass an ordinance putting 48 hours in writing, that will be a hammer. And right now, your officer have the flexibility of handle things on a case-by-case basis. And I just don't understand when you say you don't have the tools, because I'm sure the city have ordinances against, throwing garbage, leaving garbage around, or.
But their possessions aren't garbage, right? These are personal belongings that they're leaving on city property, and I don't believe we have any sort of rules that says you have to remove your personal belongings from city property. So this would give them the ability to say you can't keep you have to move your stuff. Personal stuff can't stay on city property. So if you wanted to park your bike out here and store it for a month, there's nothing that we can do to make you move it currently.
Got it. So that provide helpful context, I guess. Okay. So, but if you're going to tie my hand and ask me to set a city ordinances, I wouldn't support much like 3 hours because, sorry, I don't want to be heartless, but for administration purpose and all those concerns Councilor Wolf mentioned and Mayor Lu mentioned, tracking, or people can take from 40 hours here and 40 out there, I just don't see this will solve the problem. So if you really want me to vote on an ordinance on this, I would say 3 hours. I'm sorry, I think that's the best way to handle this. So,
Councilor Shaw? Attorney Rahala.
So I do just want to respond to that point. When we are coming up with ordinances, it's important that they be generally applicable to everybody. And so we have employees who ride bikes here and park them for more than 3 hours. So that's the issue that we're always up against, is that it has to be a generally applicable ordinance. And so 3 hours is not going to be something that we can actually enforce across the board evenly.
But we can say bikes, we can exclude bikes, or, well, I mean, we can specifically say tents or things like that, right? I think it's workable. I mean, but I have no problem people leaving bikes on a locks for, for 48 hours. But I think what I'm concerned about, based on the complaint I see from residents, is people, pack up their tents and just leave their tents around.
And a lot of times those are packed into bikes.
If that can fit in the bikes, I don't see what a problem. We can set dimension, right? Like, 4x4, whatever. I guess I have to see how the final ordinance is drafted, but to me, 48 hours, I will have big problem with that. It's just, I think it will create more works for our officers, and I would not want that. So,
I just want to say, I think this is very helpful context for us to go back to the drawing board and come up with some other options to continue to explore this concern. What we were asking for really was general guidance, not for a final ordinance this evening. So thank you.
Yeah, and we have to do notices and all those sorts of things for an ordinance. Councillor Shaw.
That was going to actually be my suggestion, because that's quite all right, because we need some ordinance, some time allocation. We don't know what that is. Want to be mindful of employees who are riding. The bike could be an issue for, if you look at 7 days a week at 6.8 hours, there was a bike that blocked all library parking. So yes, I would think that's a wonderful solution. Kim.
I'm eager to hear what you might potentially come up with. I am also open to this ordinance for 3 months and trying it out and see how it works. I think the challenge becomes, again, the very human side of it. I have a really hard time telling people they can't have their stuff there at all and not give them any solution as far as where to put it. I think individuals in these situations are having such a hard time making it through the day and trying to figure out where they're sleeping and all those sorts of things, that it also creates an incredible burden on these individuals to try to figure out where to put their stuff when we know that there is nowhere to put their stuff until perhaps next year at Just Compassion. So I think there is a solution in the future, but I also think the human side of me understands these complaints because I am answering all of them and the phone calls. I am the one getting all of these. But the human side of me also says it is unreasonable to tell somebody they can't do something and then not give them a solution or a way to rectify that. That is what I struggle with. But I understand the challenge of saying you can't keep your bike stored here for a month and take up all the spaces. I think the 48 hours is a solution kind of in the middle to test out. And so I would say that I am supportive of trying it out with the expectation of 3 months coming back and letting us know whether or not it's working. And if it's not working, coming with a better solution. So I guess, oh, yes.
Mayor, if I may. There are some other communities that have some versions of this type of language in their ordinances, and that's something that we can reach out to them and find out how's that been working for them. For example, unless Bend has changed it, they have a 24-hour rule where property has to be moved. They can't stay in any one location for more than 24 hours. That includes personal property. I can reach out to them and find out how that's been applicable, and then we can use that to help inform us to bring something back to council that may be more usable for us in the police department when we're in the enforcement end, and then still try and meet that compassion piece that's the vision of so much of the community.
That sounds like a great plan. We look forward to you coming back. Kim, did we give you all the guidance that you need?
All the guidance. I really appreciate the conversation, the discussion this evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
It was also mentioned they create the grant programs to support business. As someone who suggested that, I just want to register. I'm still very, very concerned about that program. There's only been 8 applications. It's been an immense amount of time. It is very onerous. It's for $2K. You have to have a loss as a business. Your income, personal and business income tax completely open publicly, even though it's chamber, but there's a lot of issues. So I just want to register that I hope we can come back and look at those and see if we can't make it a more viable program. Thank you, Mayor.
Is anybody interested in a break? There are still three discussion topics to go, and we are at 9:15. Do we want to take 5 minutes and use the restroom and take a break, or just power through? It's 3 because of the non-agenda item. Yep, okay, we will push through. We have the purchase and sale agreement, the River Terrace Town Center Community Park, with Cindy Engineer Wisniewski. Welcome, Joe.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm happy to be here tonight to present to you the purchase and sale agreement for the land acquisition of property in River Terrace. I believe I have a presentation, if we can have that brought up. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of, is there a slide before this? I believe I have a location map. Thank you. So this is just showing generally city as a whole. The orange square is a development considered as River Terrace Town Center. And on the left is a little bit more of a localized snip. The park property itself is located at the intersection of River Terrace Boulevard, just north of Jean Louise and east of Roy Rogers Road. Next slide, please. This is a site plan showing the future park, and part of this park is currently being developed by New Home Company, a developer working on the River Terrace Town Center development adjacent to here. On this map, what you'll see is the developer will be providing pickleball courts, a playground with swings, some hard and soft surface paths, site furnishings, a restroom, a dog park that will have a large dog and a small dog separated areas, some additional paths connecting River Terrace Boulevard to Roy Rogers Road, and also a parking lot. And the area in purple is some areas that are allotted for future development by the city at a later date, which includes an amphitheater area, nature play area, and I believe basketball court, to be determined at a later date. With that, I would like to move to the recommendation. So next slide, please. And this was just a summary of those amenities. So one more slide. So the staff recommendation is that council take action to ratify the purchase and sale agreement and approve the property acquisition of approximately 8.1 acres located at 13,600 Southwest River Terrace Boulevard for a price of $1,925,000, contingent on the satisfaction of the conditions as determined by the city attorney and city manager. I'm happy to answer any questions tonight, and I believe we may have a guest online from the developer if you have questions for them as well. So yes, at this time I would appreciate any questions or action on the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Are there any questions? Yeah, Councilor Shaw?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the presentation, and it looks like as a passenger in a car, so hopefully you're safe.
We are.
Fabulous. Would these amenities be done regardless of the city's purchase? So would the developer putting in the pickleball courts, the swings, the hard and soft surface paths, and site furnishings?
So as part of, I would say potentially no, but as part of the land use case for the development, the developer was required to enter into a development agreement for the park with the city. And the terms of that development agreement was that they would develop these amenities with compensation being SDC credits, and the city would be purchasing the land. So I don't know if we could turn to City Attorney Rajala to speak to that at all, but I believe if we don't purchase it, we may have issues with that development agreement as well.
That's correct. So we did enter into a development agreement, but so there would be issues of breach if we don't go through with it. The other thing is that then it wouldn't have to be a public park, and so that is part of the purpose of this, is so that we have a public park in this area.
So I can tell you it's being developed. I drive by it every day. The pickleball court is almost up. The dog parks are basically done. Yeah, so it looks like the playground area has yet to be started, but it is in development.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to ask you that question.
Yep,
And so I
every
guess
day.
the other question is this money allocated within our budget? And is it the total amount? Okay.
Yes, the total amount is allocated as part of the CIP. It is budgeted across fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, but the total amount is allocated and available.
Thank you, Joe. And that includes maintenance in the future years?
So the maintenance, we've actually negotiated with the developer that they do an extended period of time for maintenance. Our typical time frame is a 2-year maintenance period when there's any contributed capital through private development. And we have a phased turnover to the city over a 5-year period so that we have time to bring on the additional staff in the current, or not the current, but the proposed fiscal year 25 to fiscal year 30 CIP budget document. We do call out 2 additional FTE park staff, not only for this park, but other expanded parks in the River Terrace area and citywide.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that, and didn't know that I did know there would be 2 additional FTEs. So thank you, Mayor.
Joe, I have a question, and this is super specified simply because of my time on the Parks Board. I assume even though the maintenance is going to be the responsibility of the developer, just knowing the pickleball courts and like how specific and timing and negotiations and schedules and all of those sorts of things, is that something that the Parks Department will be managing so there isn't mayhem at the pickleball courts?
So I believe at this time, Park Manager Gruen has made a decision that we do have the scheduling at the other pickleball courts, so those are available throughout the city. This is a little bit of a smaller facility, so we were at least going to start out that it's just open, first come, first serve at this location. But yes, the near term, even though it's maintained by the developer, if there are programming needs or management of the facilities, that will still fall under Rick's purview and the parks team.
Excellent. Okay. Maybe just a recommended notice that says, be kind to the other pickleballers, or the scheduling could change. I think could even potentially be helpful, just hearing stories from other cities and knowing what our city has gone through. I think that's wishful thinking on his part.
Yes, we will definitely keep tabs of that and try to work with the users and make sure it's a smooth operation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks. Always excited about more swings. Kids love swings, and there's not a whole lot there's no swings in the neighborhood parks. So this provides the only swings that are gonna be in the area. That's my only question / comment, other than I, again, see the changes every day. Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Joe, and really appreciate the prior tour of the area and also prior briefing. And I'm sure whether the pickleball scheduling works or not depends on how many emails Mayor Lu will get. With that, I move to approve the purchase and sales agreement to acquire approximately 8.1 acres of parkland, including constructed park improvements contingent on satisfaction of the conditions as determined by city attorney and city manager.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all of those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is adopted by unanimous vote of the council. Our next item on the agenda is to discuss solid waste franchise fees and charges with Assistant Finance Director McClung to be here to give us the city teammate report. Welcome. We also have consultant Chris Bell with us. And I also see Pride in Waste Management. Hello.
Good evening, Mayor Lube and members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. My name is Keith McClung, and I'm the Assistant Finance Director for the city. I'm joined by Chris Bell of Bell & Associates, who was contracted with the city to do a rate study. Thank you for having us. Tonight, we will be presenting the results of Mr. Bell's rate study. But before turning it over, I'd like to provide some background for the reason for the rate study and also the guidance being sought from council tonight. Every March, the 2 solid waste franchisees are required to submit an annual financial report. Staff review those reports and determine the blended rate of return. Depending on the results of the blended rate of return, the Tigard Municipal Code 11.04.090 applies an annual increase based on CPI. If the blended rate falls within the 8 to 12% required rate of return, the city applies this CPI increase. If the blended rate falls outside of the 8 to 12% requirement, a rate study is automatically required. For the year ending December 31, 2023, the blended rate of return for the franchisees was 5%, thereby triggering an automatic rate review. For tonight, Mr. Bell will be discussing the results of the rate review and present options to council for consideration that includes the timing of the rate increases. We are seeking guidance from council on how to proceed with the rate increases, and based on this guidance, staff will be returning June 18th for a public hearing and an updated fees and schedules charges for council's consideration. I'd also like to note that the representatives from Pride and Waste Management are also in the lobby behind me and will be available for questions. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Bell.
Mayor Lube, members of council, thank you for having me. And I would strongly suggest after the presentation, ask the waste haulers a lot of questions. You know, they've been sitting here for a while, so they're prepared. First slide, please. So every year, as Keith was saying, the haulers submit an annual rate report. And this year, again, it was a little bit lower. And if you recall, last year when we met, the rate increase was effective January 1st. So you had a full year of a lapse of rates. And in that time, you had significant rate increases primarily on the disposal side. But you can see here that over the past few years, the amount of people and the amount of customers has increased from the previous year. But again, the overall rate of return for the composite was less than 5%, which triggered the rate review. Next slide, please. And again, this is right here's the franchise map. I believe Councilor Wolf had a question regarding something as far as the operations within the city, and we can answer that question later on after this presentation. But you can see most of the city, especially the residential area, is serviced by Pride Disposal. In the top north part, including the Washington Square Mall, is serviced by Waste Management. Next slide, please. The adjusted composite, as you can see here, is broken down by the 3 primary services provided by the haulers. That would be roll cart, which is mostly residential, commercial container, which is businesses, and then drop box, which is a combination of industrial, large industrial waste and occasional services provided to residents and or construction. But again, the total rate of return for the composite was 5% for the 2023 year. Next slide, please. This year, when we do the rate review, or when I do the rate review, we look at the report that's submitted by the haulers. We make any adjustments, and we look at line item expenses. And this year is no different. And each one of these expenses, as we're detailed here, are increasing, which, in some years they're flat, some years they decrease. But this year, a significant amount of the costs associated with providing the service have increased. The biggest one being disposal. We're a little under 12%, and organic processing, which is the yard debris. And if you recall, last year, the increase or the city selected to add food waste to the yard debris, which caused that to the increase to was a little bit higher than anticipated. The union contract, both companies operate under a union contract, and again, that was up a little bit this year. Last year was a significant increase. Truck depreciation increased too, and what's interesting is over the last 4 years, there's been a significant problem with supply chain, and trucks that usually used to take six to 9 months from order to delivery are now taking up to 2.5, 3 years. And Pride Disposal, the bigger hauler of the two franchisees, received a significant amount of their trucks in the second and third quarter of last year. And when those trucks hit the books, that cost increased, and it's representative of the 17% increase in the depreciation. However, with new trucks comes decreased repair and maintenance, and so there is a slight offset associated with that. Administrative costs increased by 4%, and then the franchise fee increases 7% with the increase of 8% revenue over the previous year. So those are all the factors went into estimating what the 2024 rate of return is going to be. Next slide. So the projected rate of return, again, this is assuming or utilizing, incorporating the 8% increase that went into effect January 1st. Increased that roll cart by just under 4%, the container by just to 8%, drop box to 10%, and the overall rate of return is 7.2%, just slightly below the 8% rate of return that is the operating range that the city has. Next slide, please. One of the impacts, significant impacts, and this is pretty significant over the last 4 years, that your disposal increases within the Portland metropolitan area have increased by 57%. 4 years ago, they were around $98, and right now we're at what, $155 per ton. This cost is probably going to go up again next year, probably about 7 to 10%. No one really knows. There's a lot of questions that are surrounding this and why it's gone up, and there hasn't been a lot of input from Metro on why, and there hasn't been a plan put in place to really cap this out. If you didn't have this increase, and you being Tigard, as well as Hillsborough, Beaverton, and every other city within the Portland metropolitan area, you wouldn't see the significant rate increases on collection costs. My opinion is this is a leadership problem at Metro. These significant increases to go from $98 back in 2020 to almost $190 projected in 2026 is significant. Metro staff likes to present Portland Metro, and compare that to Seattle, compared to San Francisco. In my opinion, that's not a very good comparable. I think the best comparable is to look across the river at City of Vancouver and Clark County, and the increase there, or the tipping fee there, is about $105 a ton. $105. There's a lot of questions, and I come to city councils every year, and there's kind of an initial rage, and then everybody forgets about it. But at some point, city council members are going to have to really figure out, and I think it's going to be a collaborative effort between Metro and local governments here to figure out what is the best solution long-term for disposal. Because within the Portland metropolitan area, not one city requires garbage collection, not one. And so at some point, we hit that ceiling where people look at the rates and they say, this is too high. What can I do to reduce my rate? You can only put so much garbage in a 20-gallon cart, and then you can end up putting that in the recycling cart or the yard debris bin, and that really doesn't, that exacerbates a problem that we already have, because disposal for all three of those materials is incredibly expensive. The first project I ever did for rates was here in the city of Tigard, and I believe the rates that we are looking at, and this is back in 2003, around $12 per customer per month. You're going to look at these rates, and they're significantly high. We're looking at anywhere from 5 to 10% for the last few years. That's a lot of money. At some point, we're going to get to a point where it's $50 a month to throw away garbage. So this is, I think, a concern for everybody. At some point, there's going to be that pendulum's going to swing, and there's going to be a collaborative effort. And I hope that this is the year. I hope that the leadership at Metro takes into consideration the impact of their decisions. Next slide. City of Tigard ordinance requires an adjustment between the 8 and 12%. Since we're below the 8%, it says rates will be effective July 1st. When we were working on this, we had 3 dates that we were looking at the rate adjustment. The first one was January 1st of next year, and then we looked at August 1st of this year, and then we looked at July 1st, and the ordinance says July 1st. So what we're presenting here is the July 1st ordinance, July 1st rates per the city ordinance. Next slide, please. So the increase for the 35-gallon cart is 7%, and that takes in consideration the factors that I addressed earlier, the projected increases. The commercial container rate is in a good spot. So the additional cost associated with that service is just the pass-through of the disposal cost, and no increase for drop box or roll-off. It's within that 8 to 12%. If that rate decision is made to push it back to January 1st, there's the cost and delay of that. And that residential roll cart, the average cart, which is the most popular, increases almost 12% with the delay of the rate. The commercial container has an increase of $1.76 per collected yard. And the way that's calculated is, if you have a 2-yard container, it's picked up once a week, it's 2 times 4.33 times that $1.76 or the $1.106. So it's a significant increase for commercial customers. And again, no increase for drop box or roll-off compactor. Next slide. So here are the rates. The proposed rates are, and these are, like I said, these are the most popular services provided within the City of Tigard for a July 1st implementation. And you can see it's about a 7% increase for the 35-gallon cart, a little higher for the 65 and the 95, and that's primarily due to the increased disposal cost. The increased collection cost, whether you have a 35-gallon cart or 60 or 95, is still the same. That the cost of the truck, the recycling is the same. Everyone gets the same size of recycling and yard debris container. So that collection increase includes recycling, yard debris, the cost of truck, the cost of the union contracts, everything else. For the commercial line of business, we're looking at passing through the increase on just the disposal fee. And so you're looking at the rate, again, it adjusts with the size of the container. Next slide, please. If we look at delaying that increase till July 1st, the rates go up a little bit higher. In this case, almost 12% for the 35-gallon cart, up to 14% for the 95-gallon cart, and again, around 8 to 9% for a significant amount of the commercial container customers. Next slide, please. So, the previous practice has been to push through and have the consolidated rates effective July 1st. However, with the city ordinance specifies July 1st. But if the city decides to wait till January 1st, the cost of delay has an increase on the rates from 7% to 12% for the residential customer. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the last slide? Oh, okay, fantastic. So if there are any questions.
Yep, there we go. Are there questions? Yeah, Councilor Wolf.
Thank you. Oh, it seems loud. Thank you, Chris, and that was very informative, and thank you all for being here. And learning more about some of the things happening in Tigard for sure. So, Chris, I know you're probably aware that I attempted to try to align the benchmarking, and I realized the January-July timing also adds another layer. And I think when I looked at it, residential seemed fair, and I might be even way off in how I was attempting to compare. And then I think that commercial seemed a little different. So I was just trying to understand that piece, if that made sense. So.
I saw the question and I thought I could probably talk about an hour to 2 hours with Councilor Wolf on this. And before I checked on your background and I realized you were a CPA, and I told Eric, I said, okay, yeah, I can talk finance and she'll understand where I'm going with
Which
this.
is almost, I would say, the majority of it. So we're here for you.
Okay,
Go for it.
but that was there. There's back to the rate adjustments. I work with a lot of jurisdictions here in the Portland metropolitan area, and the rate adjustments, we were always hoping to get like a year to 2 to 3 years on the rates. We'd set the rates, we'd have that range from 8 to 12%. We'd set it at 10, it'd run a little bit. There's some variables on there. There was always growth. Growth helped to reduce the cost and stabilize the rates. But we're kind of at an interesting time because we've got disposal fees, which are a significant amount. They're around 60%, 60 to 65% of your total bill right now. You've got equipment that, a truck that was, 10 years ago, I did a comparable for another city. They had a truck that was $180,000. Their newest truck was just under $500,000 for the same truck, you've got costs that, as you're looking at trying to plan long term, between the trucks, the labor's, reacting with the market, and that's always been very predictable. The growth is not as robust as it used to be, and so that's having some impact. And then the other big thing is recycling, and recycling floats on a commodity, and so on the value of the commodity. And when the economy is down, people don't buy a lot of stuff. Cardboard in the state of Oregon with the bottle bill, the thing that has the most value that's set in the curbside or the commercial is cardboard, and that's the heaviest material that you're going to collect. And so when the value of cardboard goes down, the cost of recycling goes up. And we've seen that, over the last couple of years, the value of the cardboard just hasn't been what it's been because we're in a slowing economy. I don't think it's officially been called recession, but you don't require much cardboard. And then there's the reduction in packaging. There's a lot of factors that are going on, but the value of the material collected has been diminishing, and that usually offsets the cost of processing. That's been problematic. With the move to add food to the yard debris, that's been very expensive. Like I said, a long time ago, when we were collecting yard debris, it was $4 to $6 a yard. Today, it's $55 a ton just to process it, and then Pride collects it and they take it to their transfer station, consolidate it, and they take it over to North Plains as opposed to hauling it straight over there. Waste Management's got the top part; they can actually hit North Plains on the way back. So there's additional costs associated with the processing of yard debris. Everything that you look at in the garbage collection realm is increasing. I had a city council member wanted to know why it doesn't go up by just CPI. And I went back and I looked at all the costs associated with the company I'm working with, and the only cost that was going up by the CPI was the disposal at the landfill, and that was based on a portion of the CPI. And if you look at the costs that Waste Management are incurring or in Pride are incurring, same thing. The only thing that I think is adjusted by the CPI today is that landfill disposal contract. Everything else is going up. The other piece too that's really significant too, especially for Pride, is insurance. And there's only 4 carriers in the United States that'll underwrite garbage companies. As far as Waste does have the capacity to self-insure because they're a bigger company and they can do that. But that's another cost that's going up. So every year, when we look at these costs, I'm hoping we get to that point where we don't have to raise the rates, that they'll stabilize, but we're not getting there. And so, you know, when I look at Metro, and like I was saying earlier, there's a lot of questions that are surrounding there. Nobody is really stepping up and say, we got to figure this out. We got to figure out, we can't see $200 a ton for garbage disposal. When you can drive across the river, and people do this, they self-haul to Vancouver because it's a heck of a lot cheaper. I had a family member that drove over to Lincoln City because he was doing some stuff over there. So he put his garbage in the back of his truck, took it there, and he was surprised how inexpensive it was for him to throw garbage away in Lincoln City compared to here. So there are just a lot of things that are going on, and I think that at some point, if we really want to address a lot of the issues, there's got to be a collaborative, open process, and we haven't seen that in a long time. When I first started working in this realm and as a consultant, there used to be these monthly meetings at Metro, and it was everybody who was anybody in garbage was at these meetings, and it was a great effort because everybody was able to talk and reach decisions. Not, you know, Metro was Metro, but they always listened, and everybody knew the process. We're not seeing that today, and I think it's problematic that if everybody understood how expensive this service is becoming, and they see the challenges associated with this, they would have a higher appreciation for that. So I'm rambling on your question, but there are concerns about this, and then you know, as a hauler, you're always trying to look for ways to reduce rates, right? How can we, or not rates, but costs, and a lot of these costs are starting to be locked in. You know, like I said, the cost of the truck, the cost of labor. You know, you're talking about growth here within the city of Tigard. There's not a lot of growth anymore because everything's kind of filling in, right? Yeah. And again, growth in areas has always been a good stabilization for rates. And we're, like I said, we're not seeing that as much as we used to over the last, previous years.
Well, Chris, thank you. You clearly have thought a lot about the costs, and Mayor, if you need a Metro champion to discuss rates, I'm happy to do that because I think it's fair. Yeah. So thank you.
It is a topic regularly amongst the mayors, so maybe it's something that we need to take more robustly. Councilor Shaw?
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate both Pride and Waste being in the room as well. I don't know if it counts, my brother's a CPA, but for those who are listening in who may not be CPAs, if we did an increase in January of 8% and we're proposing 7% in July, that's 15.1% for 2024.
That's a lot.
Okay, so I just want to make sure.
That goes back to, when you look at that
Mm-hmm.
when I see those numbers, it's just, unfortunately, I'm kind of getting numb to it, and that's kind of a bad thing because I always look to, if we can get those rates where we don't have to raise the rates, I'm always happy, right? Because everybody's, hey, and you think the haulers, they look at the rates, they don't want to raise the rates every year because they don't want to hear that from the customers complaining. And so they're hoping for the same thing. Hey, if we can get to a point, we can have a break where we don't have a rate increase, that'd be a fantastic thing. I think we've had rate increases in the city of Tigard, I think, the last 4 years. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I would echo bringing up the conversation with the mayors about Metro and also the food and yard debris. I was a no against that because of the cost last year. So I know it may be off the table, but in a year where we've seen 80% PGE, we know water's gone up at least the same amount, and for all the right reasons, except for the Metro disposal fee, it makes sense to have some increase for Chris, for the reasons you stated, but those would be my questions and just some concerns.
I guess we also, and I will go back and ask Councilor Wolf on whether or not to do the rate adjustment July 1, 2024 or January 1, 2025? Because I think we have questions, but that's the specific guidance we need to provide tonight.
Well, if I remember last year, right, this is the loop we got into, because here we're sitting on June 11th to make that kind of a shift. Because I get we're catching up. So now we're in this spot where we're just forever catching up on January 1st. But I'm trying to figure out, how do you more slowly get yourself back to July? And it just seems like a lot. I'm just really wrestling with, and I appreciate Councilor Shaw kind of, going, we did this in January and now we're looking at doing this in July. I'm not debating that it needs to happen. So it's just to do that twice in a year when people are screaming about utility charges with PGE. What makes sense? To say that you're going to increase it more in January than July, I don't know if you just get in line, or align, not in line, align this year and then be done with it, right? Or, I mean, I remember this conversation last year.
Yes. Do we also, is the ordinance in the negotiation, is that, like, if we were to remove that provision from the ordinance, because I think we're feeling stressed out because it's in the ordinance to increase it in July, what would that look like?
So we would want to check with the concurrence of our haulers to make sure that they didn't consider that part of the franchise, that was part of the city's code that we could unilaterally amend.
Okay. I'm just wondering in general, just because for that reason as well. Okay. Councilor Shaw? Yeah.
I didn't give an answer.
Oh.
I mean, I mean, to be honest, if that's is it July 1st or January 1, I guess my question is, I remember going to January because it seemed like a big jump again. So for our customers, what's the better answer? And I mean,
here's the unknown. Because everybody's hoping that disposal fee will stabilize at some point. That's the big unknown. If that were to stay flat, right? If we had some assurance from Metro that rate would be minimal next year, then there would be that catch up. But there's the unknown. We were told. The public was told that there's going to be 7% increase over 4 years. It hasn't. It's been well over the 7%. So that's the problem. It's trying to predict the unknown, and like you were saying, we're on this perpetual trying to catch up with it, with the rate, because the rates we're looking at the fiscal year for government, but we're looking at that implementation on January 1st, and like Councilor Shaw said, 15% within the 6 months is a significant amount. But if you look at delaying it again, you're at 12% next year. And if the rates, come out next July, and again, if it's a 10% increase, which I think it probably will be, just based on talk with people who are close to transfer operations for Metro and former employees saying, there's a lot of stuff going on that there's a lot of uncertainties. So I keep thinking about that. What do you catch up with it right now and be done at a 7%, or do you wait for the 12% and then it'd be great if we didn't have this conversation next year.
my only concern is the timing. That
the timing's lousy. The timing's just lousy.
It's 3 weeks, right?
Okay. I know you're not giving a hard answer, and that's fine. We can continue to have this conversation. Councilor Shaw, do you have a particular feeling one way or the other?
I struggle too, just because it's a 3-week time frame, and that's a kind of a dip into a pocketbook that I'm concerned about. preps for the haulers, is this a significant impact, whether we do July or January?
If you're going to speak, I'm going to ask you to come up here just so anyone watching can also hear you, please.
Hi, I'm Eric Anderson. I'm the controller at Pride Disposal. In response to your question, the way that these reports work, they are delayed. Right? So all of these discussions are being based on the 2023 numbers. And so that means those returns that you're looking at, that's what we actually had last year that we're operating off of. So the numbers that Chris has put together for these new rates would be, if you make them effective July, they are to get us through that next year. As he's talking about, we don't want to have these giant increases. We don't like that. And so from a company standpoint, if this delays to July, or to January, as you're talking about, it is a larger increase to the customer. You know, it's a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of heartache with that large number. That also means that 6-month difference from July to January is also, we don't have that money to help offset these costs that we're already incurring. And so these giant increases for Metro that hit in 2023 are about to hit us again in July 1st, 2024. The insurance increases, the wages, all of these costs that Chris had just pointed out, we're already incurring those on a monthly basis. And so it's difficult from the company standpoint, but it's also your decision as, you know, council, what you want to do with it. So just wanted to share those pieces with you.
Can I ask you while you're up here, can you talk about the difference between franchise income and net profit? Simply because I think when we talk about the franchise income needing to be between 8 and 12%, our community goes, well, that's a great rate of return. I wish I could have that guaranteed. And so I think they're equating franchise income with net profit.
Sure. So yes, that 8 to 12%, it's a number that people look at and exactly what you're talking about. What they don't know is that is not all encompassing. That's not profit. The company, if it was a 10% return, we're not pocketing that 10%. We still have income taxes we have to pay off of that. That is only based on costs that are allowed by the franchise to be put into those rates as well. Reinvestment into the company in terms of cash reserves. That's not built into any other numbers. That's part of that bottom line when we finally get to it. That's all built into those numbers. And so that target of a 10% is to help us to be able to come up with the money to pay for the $500,000 truck, to help, you know, if there's repairs that we need to do to front the cost for any growth there is. We got to buy new containers, new carts. You know, every new house that they're building off of, you know, just outside the city here, you have to have a garbage cart, a recycling cart, a yard debris cart, and a red bin for your glass. And that's all that we need to, you know, put up front. And so if we're able to offset some of that with some cash payments versus financing, because right now interest rates have gone from, we used to be able to finance things in the 2 or 3%, they're now 7+. And it gets very significant as we're financing a $500,000 truck. And as you know, Chris had shown last year, we had a whole bunch show up all at once. So we tried to be on a cycle where every year we'll get a couple of new trucks to replace the old ones that are, you know, at the end of their life and need to move on. We had, I think, 2, almost 3 years worth of trucks all show up within a 2-month time period, which is part of the depreciation hit. But as we're looking at those returns, we need to be able to absorb, you know, within our operations as well. So when we come in at a 5%, we still have to pay our taxes. We still have to, you know, get into our capital reserves for those pieces. We also have to absorb any costs that we miss in those forecasts until the next time that we're able to talk. And so if Metro sticks with that 7 to 8% they're talking about versus they come back and say 11 to 15, we have to absorb that. these rates don't ever go back and make up for us not being at 10%. They're set moving forward so that we can try and get to that target moving forward. But we're never made whole, and that 10%'s not, put it in the pocket. There's still a lot of things that have to come out of that as well.
Council President Hu?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, unlike you and Councilor Wolf, I'm not a CPA. I'm a lawyer. So, so to help people like me understand this, are there any like a one-pager that people who are not familiar with or not CPA can actually read and understand why the increase is required? Is that?
Yes, I did. I wrote a wonderful report. I don't.
Okay,
I don't think anybody read it, but it's in there. It's yeah. It's you got that right. Keith has got the report. Keith and Eric have it. They
It's in
got
the study?
that. And then yeah.
No, one pager.
Okay.
One pager.
Well, there's a nice cover on it.
Because I'm thinking about, like Councilor Shaw, worry about people who are watching.
Yeah.
And people who are ultimately paying this, whether in July or February, January. I think they just want to understand.
Oh, yeah.
And
No,
I'm
it's-
really concerned when you say it's Metro. They don't know how to have no direction on how to keep this under control. And you say the city councilors mayor should band together and do something about it. And some of us interact with Metro councilor on a regular basis. I just went to a reunion with one of them on Saturday, and it would be helpful just have one pager, not a page, one pager, and just help us who are not CPA explain why the Metro is doing this and what the problem is, and we are forced to do this. So
there's I think there's a summary. Well, I think there's a summary page, and it's an eight-page report with a lot of tables. So there's a lot of comparable numbers. I try to make it as simple as possible because.
And most people are not going to read 8 pages.
No,
I
they're not.
guarantee you
That's
that.
why I put tables.
So that's
on
why
there.
I'm saying. I was thinking about half page, but I'm trying to be,
I
generous. Say one pager, maybe.
I can give you anything you need. So if you
Okay.
say, Chris, I want this, I will get that to you.
Okay.
I will
I mean, it will help the city or
No,
help
absolutely.
the hauler just convey our message to our customer.
Yes.
I know they're frustrated and I'm frustrated, but Metro is. I mean, we have to work with them, so I don't want to throw them under the bus. But
that's why I'm saying that's. Like I said, there used to be a collaborative process,
Right.
And I have a colleague who's retired, and he was telling me about when he first started at Metro, 35 years ago. And he said we would go out to every city and explain why we'd do an increase, and we
Right,
would meet with city
right.
councilmen, kind of in a work session.
Yeah,
Those
but
don't.
I understand. It's late, so I don't want to
Yeah. No,
drag
but-
this on fire. But if there's any ways the city teammate or you can
I
work
will get you
together
something.
with a one pager
Yes.
or half pager if possible, just to explain why why we're doing this, because what Metro is doing and
Metro's part of it.
How we can contact everybody can contact Metro if we are loud enough. Hopefully something will be done, right? So,
Yes.
but in terms of July or January.
Well, here's the one thing too I found out last year when I appeared here at this venue and presented the rates. Metro actually watches all these. They actually have people, Public Works, who are going to watch this, and so
Hopefully.
No, they do, because I was working on Metro and I was asked to not say anything disparaging about Metro.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Yeah.
But this is the reality.
No, I was asked to do it.
Oh,
I was pulled off a project I was doing for because they felt, me talking to you as a council member saying this is what's going on was disparaging to their cause. So they do watch this, So I will, and I'll make it a point to because I'll probably get a call tomorrow.
Okay.
Regarding that, but I will put together something for you, and I'll send it to Keith. that says here, here's some of the, here's what the issues are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not being very helpful.
No, I think it's just as challenging as the conversation we had earlier in a different kind of way. And I really struggle with essentially giving like 2 weeks notice to individuals that their bills are going up, by almost 8% when people are really, really struggling. And I, as a finance person, I absolutely appreciate that y'all are struggling too. But I can't get over the wanting to have cash reserves, and I appreciate that and understand it as somebody who does books. But I also sit there and I go, many of our community members can't put money into savings accounts, right? Like they are having to make decisions between purchasing groceries or doing these sorts of things and paying their bills. And it's a real honest, this is not for dramatics. There are conversations that I have with people, and to not give them what feels like no warning is very, very challenging. Yeah, feel free to, you're gonna need to come up here and speak on the mic, please. One microphone on at a time, otherwise we get feedback, please. Yeah?
Would you like to go first? Sure. Good evening. My name is Mike Jeffries. I'm the Area Pricing Director for Waste Management. And I've worked in pricing for quite some time, setting rates. And, the difference between July and January, for us, it's not that big of a deal because we can certainly finance what we need to. But, when you start layering on another large increase in January, that's going to be really significant. And so I would almost recommend that if you're concerned about 24-day notice or whatever, that we look to maybe possibly do it in August. We have a lot of communities that have pushed it off to August to be able to give the proper notification, and that's what I would recommend.
So would you recommend the 7.1% in August?
I would, yes.
Okay, thank you. That's incredibly helpful.
Good evening, Kristen Leichner with Pride Disposal Company President. I would also be supportive of making that shift to August to allow more time for notice. And then I also just wanted to speak a little bit to what you're speaking about, Mayor, about folks struggling to pay their bills, and speak a bit, and not something I think we can accomplish in this very short term, but something I think that the city could look at to help with that, is some of the other communities in Washington County in the last couple of years have implemented a reduced rate program for folks that qualify for assistance on their utility bills, their electric bill, their gas bill. They can qualify for the same assistance on their garbage bill. And what the other communities have done is they've made slight increases to the rate that folks who do not qualify for assistance pay. I think in Washington County it's about 25 cents a month that the other customers pay to support that program. And then the folks that qualify for assistance get about a 75% reduction in their garbage bill. And then they are in that program for 2 years. So once they are accepted, they get that rate for 2 years, and then that expires. They can reapply if they still qualify, or if they no longer qualify, then they would go back to the regular rate program. So that's something that the communities of unincorporated Washington County, Hillsborough, and Beaverton have all implemented in the last couple of years, and I think that could be a way to support those who are struggling with those bills. So that could be something that we could look at in the city of Tigard as well. And then just on the Metro piece, I just want to speak to, we live in this world a lot, specifically with solid waste issues. And, I think as haulers, and I'll speak for Dave Huber with Waste Management in the back, that we would be happy to work with you and help, educate on where the pinch points are. Are there areas where we feel that there could be changes made? I think the main component is the $40 to $45 a ton is specifically Metro fees on that tonnage rate. And those go to pay for really great regional programs like the Household Hazardous Waste Program, the RID Patrol that does illegal dumping collection. So they support really great programs, but doing the deep dive on are those programs at the right levels? Is there too much? Is there not enough? And doing, I think, that sort of deep dive is, I think, where there needs to be a little bit more transparency and clarity about these programs are great, but are they meeting the needs? Are they exceeding the needs? Those sorts of things, I think, are maybe where there could be some adjustments or deeper dives done, and we would be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for them? No? Okay. Excellent. Appreciate your information. Would there be a consensus around the 7.1 in August?
Yeah.
Well,
And-
you just solved our problem.
And Mayor, can we say with the robust one-pager, from a communication standpoint, to be included in that August date, so that
Yeah, and I think that conversation also would need to be in partnership with the haulers who historically have sent out that notice, as well as communications from the city. Yeah, so we could work together on what that may look like. Do you feel like you have the guidance you need?
I do. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Appreciate you. Oh, I will open my computer. Okay. Our next discussion is the non-agenda item regarding the council vacancy appointment residency requirements. City Attorney Rahala or Carol, do you want me to just talk about this, or okay, I will talk about this. So we received 9 applications for the city council vacancy when it closed on Friday, and Carol, the city recorder, went ahead and called all of them to sort of get some more information on their residency. There is our charter changes, thank you again, Tigard voters, on July 1, and there are different sort of residency requirements for appointments and people running as of July 1 versus if someone is appointed June 30th. And so I think there were just some questions and concerns around an individual who applied, who has kept their address for the city of Tigard and I believe their voter registration and those sorts of things. But they have been living in Eugene while attending the University of Oregon and are have been coming home for summers, and whether or not that actually satisfies the residency requirement because of the permanent address. And so it's something where I think our previous charters have been fuzzy in areas and we have provided clarification. And it's my desire that we provide clarification on this issue because I think it's an issue for us now, and it could be in the future where previous councils did not help us with any sort of clarification. And so I will just read that as in July, in the new charter, each member of council must be a qualified elector under state law, registered to vote in the city of Tigard, and have continuously resided within the city for at least 1 year immediately before the date of election or appointment to office. So I think perhaps a definition of what resided within the city means is that perhaps maybe what would be the best guidance, Shelby?
So at this time, I would say, so I would look to the last sentence of our current charter, because we are under our current charter for the appointment right now. So council shall be the final judge of the qualifications and election of its own members, subject to review by a court of competent jurisdiction. So it seems like the pressing issue before council right now is a decision as to whether this individual has met the requirement in the current charter that says who has resided continuously for a period of 12 months or more immediately preceding the election. So instead of offering a broader interpretation of November, which may or may not happen, I would say the issue before council right now is a decision on whether this person should be forwarded for your consideration in the next round of interviews, the selection for this appointment.
Thank you for the clarification. Okay, so I think it revolves around the resided continuously for a period of 12 months or more, and whether or not somebody who is in college in a different city but has kept their permanent address in the city of Tigard, if they meet that qualification. I don't, so I'll start because all of you have been, I don't think they do. I think it matters as far as residing continuously. I think it matters where you sleep and where you spend your time. So I appreciate this individual wanting to be involved, and I hope that they join a board and committee, but I don't think they make the requirement. Yeah, Councilor Wolf?
I think continuously is the operative word, and how I define that is where are you sleeping? So, yeah.
Okay. Councilor Shaw?
I was going to mention the exact same, Mayor, you had mentioned, as well as Councilor Wolf, continuously is where they're sleeping. So I would say thank you for applying, but we would really like you to apply potentially for a committee or task force instead.
Council President Hu? With your legal mind?
Yeah, I've been reading, the charter the city attorney mentioned, and our constitution, which said residency requirement for governor, because recently we have a Democratic candidate who the Oregon Supreme Court rule was not eligible, but in that case, the in our Oregon Constitution actually phrase it differently. It says a resident within the state for 3 years, whatever. So our Oregon Constitution say a resident. To me, it's very different than our charter, which says have resided. Because have resided, as you said, is more of a verb, right? Resident is more of a adjective or status. And if you are a resident, the Oregon Supreme Court went through all those, intent tests, it's more complicated, right? Because it's the status. But for us, I think it's more straightforward. As you said, it's a verb, so resided means sleep. So for me, I agree with you. Sorry, this is just a longer way of getting to agreeing with you. It's like, because if our charter said who is a resident of our city, then my conclusion might be different. It might involve more of an intent analysis. But since this is a verb, that somebody has to reside it, it's more straightforward to me. If you haven't resided, which means you slept continuously, then you don't qualify. So so I do not think this person qualify under our current charter.
Excellent. Do you need us to do some sort of a motion or formal action?
A motion would be great.
What's the motion?
Would it be a motion to disqualify this individual based on not meeting the requirement to have resided continuously for a period of 12 months?
Yes, exactly.
Oh.
So moved. Just say so moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Do we have to mention the name though? No?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because can't we just define continuously as residing, that we move to give clarity? It seems odd to say that. I mean, I know this is about one person, the deadline is done, but I'm trying to give clarity to the challenge. The challenge is, how do we define continuously? Is where you sleep. And maybe I'm trying to be a lawyer and I'm not.
So I would actually suggest keeping it confined to just this one individual. You are determining the qualification of this one person, not interpreting the charter. Interpreting the charter is a little bit different process. We'd want to go through we'd have to do it by resolution. So I would say let's keep this confined to just this individual's eligibility in this current appointment process.
So because we are talking about this individual, should we name them to be specific? Because
we can. I mean, by reference, there's only one person that meets all of the things that you've talked about.
Excellent. Okay. So there is a motion on the table to disqualify this individual by not meeting the residency requirement because they have not resided continuously for a period of 12 months or more in the city. Is there a second?
Can we send applicant number 9 at least?
That's fine. Applicant number 9.
Okay.
Or
Did you want to
do you accept the amendment? Okay.
I accept the amendment.
Excellent. Is there a second?
Second.
All of those in favor of the motion that I will not say for a fourth time, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes with the unanimous vote of council. Well done, everyone. There is no executive session. I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Move we adjourn.
I second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you so much. If you're still with us, Tigard, we hope you have a good night.